Um, Neil is, this is not Neil. So Neil's on vacation. So if you were not sure who Bob Cook is, Bob Cook's here filling in. Our director and all things knowing and seeing, right? So.
Oh, absolutely.
Perfect. Perfect. All right. So we're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order and get adoption of the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda? Mayor Becker's made a motion.
Second.
Mr. Diggs has made a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries. Public comment period. We do have a person signed up to speak, Parker Garrison. And Parker, just wanted to let you know that you have 3 minutes to speak. And Mr. Garrison, you are where?
Okay, thank you.
Good. You can come right on up here if you would. We'd love to make sure we can hear you very well.
Just lean into the microphone.
All right, Mr. Garrison.
Thank you,
Welcome.
Chair Qualls. I wanted to share my comments on 3 different issues. 1, the Silver Line expansion, and 2, bike lanes, and then 3, the I-77 express lanes. So now with the extension of the Silver Line to Matthews in question, and the red line being almost certain that it's going to go through, there's an opportunity to run the Silver Line so that we don't duplicate the tracks that are used by the red line and join up with the blue line in South End. Of course, I can't show everyone a diagram of this, but if we were to do this, it would save roughly 3.2 miles of track. And with each mile of track costing about $100 million to lay, that could save potentially $320 million if we were able to then just extend the red line to the Walmart on Wilkinson Boulevard. And then second, I wanted to talk about the bike lanes. I see there's some great bike lanes that are right outside our government center here. And if it was a cooler day, I might have even ridden my bike from the light rail to come here. But we're still building new roads where bike lanes are on the wrong side of parking lanes, such as the ones in Ballantyne, Upper and Lower Avenue. If you build bike lanes so that the car doors can open into the bike lanes when they're parked, that limits the use of the bike lanes. Instead, it would be better if the bike lanes were on the opposite side of parking and the bikes could cross through the parked cars whenever they had to, or even on the curb to further separate the bikes from other vehicle traffic. And then third, I also wanted to express my opposition to extending the I-77 express lanes further south. That would be the most expensive project in the state's history for only a 10-mile road, and it would be the most expensive by a factor of 2, even by the conservative estimates. We expanded I-77 already in the late 90s, and just by adding 1 more lane, and we're back to the same point now where we're just debating about extending it by another lane, and possibly even restricting some of those lanes to be toll lanes so that the general purpose public can't use them. The reception of some of those express lanes out in Morrisville has been that they haven't really benefited the average commute time, and people are still stuck in traffic moving at 10 miles an hour. Instead, I would recommend to add point improvements that don't require rebuilding all the bridges. I-66 in Northern Virginia between exits 71 and 69 has done something similar where they were able to extend a merging diverging lane, so the lane where it merges on and the lane that merges off between those 2 exits. And it turns out if you give people 1.5 miles to merge over, the general purpose lanes don't slow down nearly as much. So if we were able to get some of those connected, that would be something that doesn't require rebuilding any bridges because it's only between exits. And if we were then able to increase frequency on the blue line, that could divert some people off of I-77, be able to use something that we've already built. Thank you.
Thank you, Parker. We appreciate that. And we have our friends from NCDOT here, so I'm certain that they took some notes on some of those ideas. All right, we'll move right along to the Ethics and Awareness and Conflict of Interest Reminder.
Okay.
Cook.
In accordance with the State Government Ethics Act, it is the duty of every board member to avoid conflicts of interest. Does any board member have any known conflict of interest with respect to any matters coming before the board today? If so, please identify the conflict and refrain from any participation in the particular matter involved. Please identify any conflicts if there are any tonight.
Okay, Mr.
No?
Cook. Hearing none. Okay, we'll
Good.
move along. Moving on to the consent agenda. Looking for a motion to approve.
Second.
We've got a first and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Perfect. All right, moving on, managed lane education session. I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Cook to introduce our guest.
Yes, thank you, Lisa. We put this together. Thank you. We put this together to provide some background on upcoming decisions you're being asked to make regarding I-77 South. We wanted to give you a little bit of history and background on managed lanes, what has happened here as a region, as well as what managed lanes really are. We have a long history in this region, but a lot of it dates back to before many of you were actually serving on this board. And our speaker, David Ungama, will get into the fast lane study from, well over a decade at this point. And so we asked David to join us tonight. David has a long history, 30 years plus history working with managed lanes throughout the U.S. and abroad as well. He works for HDR. And we wanted him to come tonight and give you some background information on managed lanes. And with that, I'll turn it over to David. He has all the information, not me.
Well, thanks, Bob. I do appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for allowing me to come on in this evening and talk about one of my favorite topics to talk about, which is how we can utilize road pricing as a way of bringing and restoring balance to our roadway system in a way that helps relieve congestion as well as provide for a better experience for everyone into the future. So why am I the one that is speaking up here? Well, I've got 30 years of working with this topic, as Bob had mentioned. That's back, if you want to recall, to like the days when Windows 95 was this really exciting new piece of software where people actually lined up outside of retail stores in order to buy because they were really excited about clicking a start button, apparently. Just remember that every time you get super frustrated with your Windows 11 experience. Part of it is also understanding how the system of express lanes have evolved here in the Charlotte region. So I had some involvement back with the original fast lane studies that were conducted back around 2008 and 2009, and that led itself into the implementations that you see right now on I-77 as well as upcoming on 485. So this presentation is really going to get into a little bit about what is the basis behind managed lanes, why do we do them, what are some of the factors around configuration and funding and financing them, what are some of the options that are available to you, and most importantly, what have been the lessons learned about how these have evolved in the time since the first fast lane studies were conducted. I'm also going to use the word managed lanes, but really what we're also talking about is express lanes. Managed lanes itself is a big umbrella term that can really account for a variety of different types of applications. So if you ever thought about a busway, for example, that is a managed lane, or perhaps an HOV lane, a carpool lane. That is also a managed lane. Or perhaps utilizing your shoulders differently. These are all variations of managed lanes. What makes an express lane different and why it's also signed that way for I-77 is because it utilizes pricing as a way of providing some sort of balance to demand as a part of those roads. So for the most part, you're going to be hearing about express lanes as being a part of overall managed lanes. Of course, there's one variation to that, and that was, what was it branded way back when, 2008, 2009 here in Charlotte? Well, it was actually branded fast lanes. Still the same concept, still utilizing pricing as a way to better manage the use of those managed lanes, but they were branded as fast lanes. Why did we start looking at it? Well, okay, so the I-77 HOV lanes opened in 2004 and immediately recognized that they were underutilized. Additionally, quite a few states around the country had just opened up express lanes and had good experience with better utilization of those HOV lanes while still preserving carpool benefits. That led itself to the city's fast lane study that was conducted over the course of 3 different iterations, which we'll talk about in a moment. And that then led to subsequent development, implementation, and then ultimately operation of express lanes on I-77, and soon to be, as you can tell, in this year and beyond, 485 and US 74. The fast lane study really started with looking at all the different freeways and primary arterials within the Charlotte region and trying to figure out where were these concepts of express lanes suitable. And it started to screen those down based upon where they could be most beneficial, where they could alleviate congestion, provide an option to otherwise congested conditions, and ultimately how could they be built in an affordable manner. And that then eventually led to these corridors. These are not, too surprisingly, the same corridors which are either in operation today or in active development for express lanes as well. It's been quite a few years since this plan was done. The Fast Lanes Phase 3 concluded in 2012. And so fast forward 12 years from now, or from then, and that's where we are in terms of the regional system. So why do we look at express lanes to begin with? Well, I get excited about it because, as you've heard me say a few times already in this presentation, it helps bring balance to the supply of the roadway and the demand from customers who want to use that roadway. When you have that balance, it yields itself, as has been demonstrable across the express lanes that have already been in operation in 12 states and over 50 different projects, with higher levels of travel speeds for those who utilize the express lanes versus the general purpose lanes, much better travel time reliability, more consistent travel times, better travel times in general, and overall a better experience for the customer. Express lanes are often confused with toll roads. So 540 is a toll road. What makes it different from 77? Well, 77, you have a choice as a traveler to get in that lane or not get in that lane, literally seconds before you have to get in. And so with that decision, you can best judge for yourself whether the amount that you're about to pay is going to be worth it relative to the amount of travel time that you would otherwise have to have if you're staying in the general purpose lanes. By comparison, if you're utilizing 540 or any other toll road, you've already made your decision to pay that toll well in advance of getting to that roadway. It doesn't matter what the level of congestion is in it. You've already driven to it and you are going to be paying the toll because you have no option otherwise to utilize a toll road. So when we talk about express lanes, we're really talking about the choice that people have when they are driving along those express lane corridors. As I mentioned, 12 states have them. There are over 50 different projects that are currently in operation. Most of them had some connection to an HOV lane, either just simply being converted from an HOV lane in the past, or maybe it was converted and an additional lane was built right next to it. That's the model that I-77 had for a good portion of the roadway itself. I should note that there are more states that are also adding express lanes. So Kansas will open up theirs next year on US 69. Tennessee will be opening up its in both the Nashville and Knoxville areas. So quite a bit of new express lanes coming online even within the next couple of years. So all about that balance component for express lanes. It's really what this is all about. When you think about Economics 101 from high school, it's all about that supply and demand curve. And whenever you had an imbalance between essentially too many people want to buy something and there's just not enough of that thing to buy, it creates economic scarcity. And basically you have a shortage, right? You have a run on whatever product that it is that you're trying to purchase. That is traffic congestion. We have a run on roadway space because we are not paying enough relative to the amount that we have available. By comparison, the use of pricing in express lanes, and specifically the variation in that pricing by either time of day or by the actual level of congestion on the corridor itself, can help provide that balance. It's again, back to Economics 101, where if you allow the price to float, you can find that equilibrium point between supply and demand. And that's what gives us those overall benefits of express lanes, higher speeds, better travel times, better travel time reliability. I also like thinking about it in different terms. And this is my favorite way of thinking about this Economics 101 sort of equation for congestion. This is a real brewery in Singapore that actually has pricing, and you can see the photograph of their menu on the left side here of their beer by time of day. So when you come in at the peak hour, you actually have to pay more for the exact same pint that you would have otherwise have purchased if you came in earlier in the day. Now, why do they do that? Well, Singapore, not coincidentally, happens to have the longest running use of road pricing in the world. They have been using road pricing since the 1970s. And this brewery realized that it was effective at reducing traffic on the Singapore roadways. Why wouldn't it be effective at reducing wait times to get into their restaurant? And so instead of having to put your name on the list and having to wait outside, sitting on an uncomfortable bench for 45 minutes until you get your table to come on into the restaurant, you instead have a variation in the amount that's being charged in the restaurant. They don't have wait times for their restaurants anymore. It plays out effectively well, not only on 77, but other express lanes around the country. I like this graphic because it's a pretty easy to read and very simplistic way of looking at just what the average travel speeds are for the express lane versus general purpose lanes. In peak periods, there's more people going back to the roads. And so as a result, you do have congestion. Congestion will still exist. Congestion will still be a pressure for both the express lane operator as well as for the DOT who are operating the general purpose lanes. It's not going to effectively eliminate congestion. What it does is it effectively reduces the effect of congestion so that you can still maintain high travel speeds and have travel time reliability even when there are more vehicles in the lanes. And this, just like every other of the express lanes that are in operation, have been able to demonstrate that through the data that's collected. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what makes express lanes happen in the road, right? So there are a variety of different configurations. There are a variety of different ownership and operation models. There's a variety of different lengths and just the overall number of lane miles that you could potentially build for your express lanes. I put up these as being essentially near equivalents to I-77, being the express lane that we have in operation right now in Charlotte. Wouldn't it be, let's look at a few different configurations and different roadways that are relatively comparable in its size. The nomenclature on the very far right side probably needs a little bit of explanation. That means the number of lanes in each direction that are express lanes. The corridor itself could be a variety of lanes. Like, there are some, for example, the SR91 corridor in Orange and Riverside County. Well, that could be up to 8, general purpose lanes in each direction, plus 2 express lanes in each direction. But for this nomenclature, it's just about the number of express lanes. The R means it's reversible. So there are some situations like US 74 where the lane goes, one way in one direction during the time of day and then the other direction at the other time of day. That's what it also is on some of the express lane facilities. All right, so what does it mean for packaging a fundable solution for build these express lanes? This really provides a little picture about what it takes in terms of the combination of funding sources in order to actually be able to finance an express lane. There's the issuance of debt that toll revenue typically pays against, and there's usually also contributions that occur from other government sources or private equity sources as well if you go forward with a public-private partnership. In those situations, it's always that combination of funds that come together. The question I often get asked is, why didn't this express lane solution pay for itself? Why is there any government funding that goes into it? And the reality is there's so much other things that need to be done in order to improve a corridor. When you improve the corridor, you're kind of owning all the problems of the past. So let's fix those problems of the past. Have 10-foot lanes, probably need to make them 12-foot lanes. And that extra 2 feet per lane, that is part of that general purpose that we have with the use of public funding. This is another way of looking at this. This is Colorado's. Colorado has a variety of different types of express lanes with different configurations. There are some that are 1 lane in each direction. There are some with 2 lanes in each direction. Some were financed with public-private partnerships. That's what the DBFOM is. Okay, here it gets really geeky. It stands for Design, Build, Finance, Operate, Maintain, DBFOM. It's that F part that usually means that there's some sort of money risk at play for the facility. Each one of these has a different package because each facility looks a little bit different. What's notable, though, is that the amount of public debt, you'll notice, is relatively the same across the board for these different facilities in Colorado. They've decided by policy to try to balance that out so that they can balance the entire portfolio of express lanes in Colorado based upon the debt for those facilities. C470 is an exception of that. That's the one that also includes quite a bit of private debt involved with it. Okay, so let's talk about those configuration options. I've mentioned it before. You could have 2 lanes in each direction, 1 lane in each direction. That play out a lot as to whether you have to rebuild bridges or not, or whether what is the nature of the construction. But there are other types of options available for when you're designing an express lane. There is no one size fits all, and there's no absolute must-haves in order to build an express lane. The only probable must-have is you actually have to have toll equipment to collect tolls if you're going to be doing an express lane. That actually may not even be true into the future. There is already experimentation with the use of satellite-based toll systems and GPS systems. So maybe even 10 years from now, we won't actually have to have any toll equipment to operate an express lane. Nonetheless, besides that, you can have the options of how do you separate lanes from each other? Do you just have it as a striping? Are there the use of delineators? So, the plastic, delineators that separate out the traffic from one to the other side. All of these are different options in terms of how you configure it, which also then lend itself to how well it either operates. There are some safety considerations and ultimately as well some cost considerations. How you build it also plays out in terms of how you procure that over time. So I already mentioned the P3 model of design, build, finance, operate, maintain. Well, if you take out some of those letters in that combination, you get at different types of delivery options that are available to the DOT or any other owner for how they're building out the facilities. You can have a situation where you are utilizing contracting assistance to not only build the lanes, but also to operate and maintain them over time, but they don't have a connection to the financing. They don't have a connection to the revenue that's being produced from that facility. That's a DBOM. That's very common in the express lanes world. There is also other options, even just right simply to a traditional procurement mechanism of design, bid, build, meaning that the government issues a design contract, the designer completes that, then they send it out for letting for a contractor, the contractor builds it, and then the government operates and maintains it over time. That is also a viable and often utilized mechanism for express lanes. There is no one size fits all. Another question that seems to be coming up a lot more frequently is what is the connection of express lanes with equity itself? And there's been a lot of exploration about different ways of assisting low-income travelers in terms of their use of express lanes. But it's not just about low-income users. It's also a little bit about thinking about the geographic equity. So some regions, for example, have been concerned that only certain areas of their region have express lanes and others don't. And is that fair, first off, in terms of either the benefit of having congestion, relief on congested corridors, or conversely, is it fair that they are the ones that have a toll payment associated with that congestion relief versus other areas? That is a geographic equity, sort of pivot that we also have to think about often when we talk about equity. And so there are a variety of different policies available to how you address equity. It can involve use of incentives and discounts and exemptions for toll users. It could be by, say, HOV, as a carpooler, you don't have to pay a toll. That's very, very common across most facilities. Again, most had a connection to HOV lanes when they were built. You could also have different programs where if you are a registered low-income traveler or household, you have the access to either credits that can be used through a variety of different ways for the use of the express lanes, or perhaps in terms of an actual discounted toll rates. And there are a few facilities that I've noted that are very experimenting with that. All right, last section. So this is all about what are the lessons learned with express lanes over time. Well, the first one that we've learned over the past 10 years since or 12, I should say, since the last Fast Lanes Phase 3 study was complete, is that pricing is still largely connected to that HOV world. There are, continuing to be a variety of HOV discounts and or free use that's provided on express lanes, but that is also being put into question. Increasingly, facilities are opening without any HOV benefit. They are also reconsidering what is an eligible HOV user. So many express lanes have changed from HOV 2+ to HOV 3+. Much like I-77 did. That was 77 was part of that trend as well. There's also an increasing use of non-transponder based systems for toll collection. Camera systems have become much more cost effective than they were 10 years ago. And increasingly, they have better reliability than the use of transponders because you're only essentially locating it down to one. New York City's program, which was supposed to go into operation at the end of this month, actually, I guess in just a couple of days it was supposed to go into operation. It only utilizes license plate cameras, even though Easy Pass is available with over 90% of vehicles in New York City. That gives you an idea as just how cost effective those have come down. The second is when we think about revenue sufficiency for express lanes, most facilities, as I mentioned before, have some combination of funding in order to build out that corridor because you're doing more than just building the express lanes. You're fixing a lot of other things at the same time while you're touching that corridor. As a result, it tends to lend itself to large facilities. So dual lane facilities have now become largely the norm for managed lanes development because you're able to generate sufficient levels of revenue that can help pay for all those expenditures over time. From an operations and design perspective, we've gotten away from using concrete barriers. You do not need to have a concrete barrier to separate out your express lanes, unless it's a reversible facility. There's safety reasons for that one. But otherwise, if it is concurrent lanes in each direction, you can utilize striping, you can utilize delineators if you like. And we now have the use of technology for camera-based enforcement that's actually in operation today that can actually identify vehicles that illegally cross the line separation between the express lanes and the general purpose lanes, and then can issue fines appropriately. Last bit of kind of the lessons learned is that we've seen some evolution in the thinking about express lanes. That express lanes is now not just itself part of the solution package for a corridor, but it's rather a part of an overall picture of improvement. So being able to utilize a variety of technological resources such as active traffic management. Those are those little panels that are suspended over the lanes that tell you, whether there's an incident ahead, whether you should slow down your speeds. Those types of systems are very much put into place concurrent with express lanes, because it does extend travel time benefits to all travelers in the corridor and certainly helps reduce crashes as well. And that is really that thinking that we really see an evolution to. So what does it look like in the next 10 years? So I'm coming back here 10 years from now, and I'm telling you, doing this presentation again to your successors, what are we going to be talking about? We're going to be talking about what the managed freeway system looks like, not the managed lane system looks like in the Charlotte region. And we're able to talk about it in the context of using pricing to help provide that balance to supply and demand, and the use of technology to help us out with flow control, crash reduction, and other types of safety and flow improvement implementations. And so ultimately, it comes back to that story about Windows 95. When Windows 95 was first issued, the idea of clicking the start button was kind of scary. We actually had to have the Rolling Stones doing Start Me Up in order to make it so it seemed a little less scary. And nowadays, we just consider it to be just something that we do when we use our computer. It's going to be the same way with express lanes. It may seem a little scary, may seem a little different from how we do things today, but ultimately down the line, we have a solution set that will become part of the norm, and it will become part of the process that we understand to help regulate the use of our freeway systems so that they don't become as congested as we've had to endure today. So that's it. I know I'd speak a little fast, so I'm happy to go back and talk about any part that you may have missed. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Whew, that was fast, right? Fast, yeah. Mayor Higdon.
I'm not sure if this is a question or comment or just a concern, but this past Friday, I had to pick my wife up at exit 33 off of 77.
Oh, God bless you.
Drove up, and my concern is this: the pricing for the toll segments was off the charts. It was sometimes more than $5 per segment, and very, very few people were using them because it's too damn high, to be honest. I mean, that's just too expensive. People aren't going to pay $50 to ride in the toll lane one way. So how can we address that? I mean, I think that's almost an abuse. There was very few cars in that. I didn't go in the toll lane. I don't think I could afford it. I mean, I can't pay $50 to drive one way.
So the issue of how the toll rates are set is one that certainly is persistent in any policy conversation about any express lane. I'm going to go back just a little bit just because I think it's helpful. This slide right here, it presents, as you recall, facilities that are fairly similar to that of I-77 in structure. You'll notice most of them are P3s, a few of them are government operated. So the first difference there is that if it is a government operated facility, it is the government agency that has complete control over the toll rates. And so they get to be the ones that set it. There's a caveat. Sometimes politics can get involved with toll rate setting. So in Utah on I-15, when the express lanes were first operated, the Utah state legislature put in a requirement that no segment be more than $1. So and there were only 4 toll segments across almost 30 miles worth of express lanes on I-15. Unfortunately, that $1 was not sufficient to provide balance to supply and demand. And so the I-15 express lanes actually were just as congested as the general purpose lanes. I actually have videos that I use in another presentation that shows exactly that situation happening on those I-15 express lanes. So there is that caveat when it's all in the government ownership. There's also a variation in the P3 component to it. So I-77 is what is called a revenue risk P3, meaning that the 77 express lane partners all have risk of whether you use or not use it for whether they get paid back on their investment or not. A good number of these P3s in here are not revenue risk. They are what are known as an availability payment. Availability payment is more like a mortgage. So if you are the operator, you agreed to give your money as your investment in that facility, and you know you are going to get a set payment back from the government for the use of that corridor, provided that you operate and maintain it to an adequate level. But the government takes all the risk in terms of how much revenue is generated. They also get to have full control over the toll rates for those express lanes. So that is a way of kind of utilizing different financing models that does not necessarily lend itself to a situation where you know, as say a government official, don't have control over the toll rates.
Yeah, my question's related to along the lines of sort of lessons learned. Has there been an analysis done on how the implementation of managed lanes has impacted state funding for these roads as a percentage over the years? So the idea being, or the premise of the question is predicated on the idea that, well, if private companies and citizens pay for the roads, we don't have to. So in the end, we're letting the state off the hook by, in a sense, allowing private investment to take care of these roads. And I'm just wondering if we've ever done sort of a post-mortem analysis to see if that's actually happening, and if so, to what degree?
It's a really good question, and I think it can be looked at from a few different ways. First, to answer your question, I am not aware of an economic, impacts analysis type of research that looks at essentially what has been the effect of having the use of express lanes and tolls on overall budgeting. Like, where would you allocate those costs in different ways? Perhaps if you didn't have the express lanes or toll revenue that's generated from it as part of the package. There's also the second way of looking at it, which I think is also what you're getting at, and correct me if I'm wrong, whereby we've shifted the burden, if you will, for, away from general tax revenue into very specific user fee revenue. And so the burden shifts from broad and shallow to, narrow and deep. And that can be, I think, an interesting way of looking at how the use of express lanes and tolling in general fit into that overall mindset. You could argue that ultimately the best scenario would be to try to combine both of those, right? But that would essentially be, we would be charging all the roads a fee all the time. It might be a pretty small fee, but the burden would be shared broadly by the entirety of the population. We would still have the benefits of some level of supply and demand balancing through the use of road fees. There are some ways of looking at, a pay by mile as being an equivalent of that type of structure, and that is something that's been talked about in the context of motor fuel taxes declining over time, not necessarily in the use of road use. I think, though, what you allude to is a really good question, though, is what is the effect of that burden on individuals who are utilizing the express lanes, and how has that changed where you decide to do improvements, right? So was 77 North, for example, the best place to do express lanes from a revenue generation perspective? Or was it the best location due to a congestion problem? Was that the worst place that congestion occurs in the state of North Carolina, and hence that was the place to do it first? I think those are interesting philosophical questions. I haven't seen any research that gets into how you would make those type of policy decisions.
I think there'd be value in doing that before we run off and start doing more express lanes, because it is incumbent upon the state and the state sources of revenue to pay for the roads. So when you basically take more money to make a road and then you sell me the road, that's sort of skirting your responsibility, I think, as a state government, as you collect state taxes for the road upkeep, building, expansion, and maintenance. So it's just something to consider, and I think it's something we should look at carefully before we sign up for more toll roads.
Great point. Councilmember Driggs, you have a question?
Thank you. I thought Mayor Higdon asked an excellent question, and I'd like to take a closer look there. I traveled to Mooresville today on 2 lanes that were very sparsely traveled, looking at bumper-to-bumper traffic. And The deal that we have on I-77 North says basically you must charge enough to restrict the flow of traffic in those lanes so that they can proceed at 45 miles an hour, right? It doesn't say you can't charge more than that. And so at the end of the day, I think what it really comes down to is the algorithm, because the computer's doing it. There's not some guy that, sticks up. So there's a computer that is processing observed flows and so on. And I believe essentially computing a revenue maximizing model. But from a public policy standpoint, in order to achieve the purpose that you describe of namely balance, we have to ensure that you don't charge more than it takes to get to 45, and that therefore you see a lot of cars coming out of the general lanes and into the managed lanes. I'm wondering, on these P3 projects that are up there, how much is known about the algorithms? How much is out there in terms of the way this is done, or advice that we could get on how to do it?
So the algorithms themselves, very limited amount of knowledge is actually available. So there are a couple that are publicly available. The one that's the oldest standing is the Florida Department of Transportation has published their algorithm for the I-95 express lanes. I-95 has been in operation since 2009. So that is one that we in the field look to often, because it's one of the only ones that say, how does traffic respond in the algorithm based upon different density levels within the express lanes? So whereas when you're a government agency that's trying to review whether to implement an express lane, whether to issue a contract to a public-private partnership entity, or issue a long-term concession for that use of the express lanes, you don't really have insight into the algorithm itself. What you do have is the ability to hire your own economists that will run the exact same financial models that the concessionaire would do. And you can compare your results to their results to make sure that you're essentially getting a decent deal. That part is done, and it's done very frequently. They're called traffic and revenue studies. There are 3 different levels to them. There's what's known as a level 1, which is a planning level. That's like you would say to yourself, hey, I think I have a good idea as to where we should do an express lane. Let's run this level 1 traffic and revenue study, quickly identify what would be the parameters behind traffic reduction and revenue generation. Level 2 takes it a lot further. It goes into the level of detail so that you can make sure that this is worthwhile putting on the long-range plan, putting into the STIP, getting the public funding identified to it. The last one, level 3, is what's called investment grade. And that's the one that you would be most interested in, because as a government official, you want to make sure that the traffic and revenue parameters that you think is viable is going to compare favorably against what the investor and the concessionaire thinks is viable. And how far apart those are could really matter in terms of what those toll rates are. So that's your first way of trying to compare apples to apples without getting to look underneath the black box for the algorithm. The second part of it is going through the policy discussions to determine what are the trade-offs for putting in toll rate governors. There are toll rate governors on a variety of express lanes around the country. And those toll rates are controlled by policy so that there are minimums and maximums. If it hits a maximum ceiling, it cannot go over that. And if it hits that maximum and you want to bring it over, then it may trigger other things. A good example is in Los Angeles. That's a DBOM, not a finance, so DBOM, but it is a P3. Because it's a DBOM. I-10 and 110 express lanes going into downtown Los Angeles have a cap on it. When the pricing is no longer effective at managing demand in those express lanes, because the price that would be prevailing would have to be above that cap, they no longer actually allow people who want to pay a toll to use the lanes. It reverts back into an HOV only status because there's too much demand and the governor does not allow them to go higher to meet what demand would be. That's not a good solution either, but it is how they use it when using toll rate caps.
So that's going to continue to be a topic, I think, for us as we look at this, because if we're not getting the relief from the general lanes that is part of this whole proposition, the value proposition, then we're shortchanging ourselves. But the other question I had for you, sir, was how many companies are actually in the business of creating this kind of roadway? Like if we look at a competitive bid situation, How many viable companies are there that could enter into the bid?
Yeah, it all really pertains to what you mean by delivering an express lane, because there's a variety of different functions that need to happen. Like I work for HDR, we're an architectural and engineering company. All we do is planning and design activities. We don't build, roadways. We don't finance roadways. So I don't think we are the ones that you're talking about. I think you're talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, sir, you're talking about like who would actually finance, construct, and operate these lanes, right?
So, well, just take the arrangement we have with Sintra right now.
Mhm. Okay.
So Sintra is basically
Yep.
a design, build, F, operate. I like to call that an F bomb. But that's what I mean. So,
Yeah.
so what's the competitive landscape as we look
Yeah.
forward to a bid situation?
Yeah, there are very few operators. I am aware of 6 concessionaires that have some level of operation within the United States on express lanes and toll facilities. They often, you don't often see partnership between the different financing concessions, but they do form unique companies that become a little bit more challenging to identify, where each of the parent companies are. FHWA actually prepares a very detailed website. I know it by the acronym IPD. I think it stands for Innovation and Policy Department or Division or something like that. But if you were to look up, just say I-77 Express Lanes, FHWA, you'll find a link to that site. And I can certainly send a link to the site, out to Bob, and he can distribute after this meeting. In there, what they've done is they've done the hard work of figuring out behind these companies like 77 Express Partners, who is that really? Well, we know it's really Sintra, right? But it's sometimes hard to figure that out for all the other facilities. They've done the hard work of actually breaking down all the teams and separating them out by who had what functions for each of those facilities. The nice thing about that site as well, it also is where I got all the numbers when it comes to this delineation between what is debt finance versus what is not debt finance, and goes for a variety of facilities well beyond this one. So that might help also answer that question.
Okay.
Should note that also there's only one that's based in the United States, and it's mostly because the United States does not have a history of doing toll road concessions. When you look around the world, most of the toll roads are done in public-private partnership like structures and toll road concessionaires. So that's why you have Sintra, Transurban, I always forget the name of the Brazilian one, begins with BR too. Brisas, thank you. Those companies are typically foreign because that's where the base of concession experience is when it comes to toll roads.
Thank you.
Great. Councilmember.
Yeah, thank you for coming out tonight. Presentation is very well done. I have another policy-related question because it is important to this topic. So I'm interested in whether or not there's a commonly accepted stated responsibility of the state government to improve the non-managed lane performance when we enter into a managed lane agreement. For example, we even had a citizen come up tonight and ask about, the merging lane traffic, which is what we experience, right? When people talk about 77, the traffic's from the merge, and the toll lanes do nothing to address that. And extended ramps and things of that nature would address it. So is it kind of like, hey, punt, we've got managed lanes, now we're done. And if you really want to be relieved of traffic, then pay your tolls? Or does the state still have the responsibility to improve the non-managed lanes after an agreement is made?
Yeah, it's a great point. I would argue that it is all incumbent upon the regional planners and DOT staff and decision makers to try to address that question directly. When I say there's no one size fits all, it also means there's no one size fits all when it comes to what happens to all those people who don't use the express lane. And it's a good example on this slide right here, the US 36. It's the one that we had. This is the US 36 as well, right? This graphic that shows that the express lane is much more effective than general purpose lane. What this graphic doesn't show is that prior to implementation, the general purpose lanes were far lower in terms of their travel speed. So their travel speeds improved. Why? Well, one, you built a new lane, the express lane, in each direction. So that took some of the demand off the general purpose lanes, put them into the express lane. So the general purpose lane travelers there, their experience was improved like that, for a while. But as the gentleman who gave comments at the beginning of the session had noted, when you build a new lane, sometime ultimately enough demand is generated so that all the value of the new capacity is eroded by the demand that comes to that facility. That's no different from this situation where a new express lane, for example, helps out the general purpose lanes. We'll expect the general purpose lanes to increasingly become congested. But other things happen in that corridor as well. They built a side-by-side bus-only shoulder lane. So now buses can utilize the shoulders, and it was a much wider shoulder as a result, connect in directly to park and rides that are on the ramps. So that way the rider experience is as close to having a bus rapid transit in the US 36 corridor as you could have without actually having to build like stations like you would see like in the middle of the lanes. So those bus on shoulder lanes are very effective at ensuring that transit use is as high speed as possible within the corridor. They built a bike lane to go all the way across from Boulder to Denver in the same package. And then finally also provided bus use incentives to travelers within the corridor. So if you are an employer, for example, that is located right next to the express, to the US 36 corridor, you have access to a discounted bus program to give to all of your employees called an EcoPass. All those things together were part of that P3 package. This P3 is structured in a similar way as I-77. It is a revenue risk P3. So the concessionaire is a company called Plenary Roads. I can't remember which company or country they're out of. I think Portugal. Don't quote me on that. Plenary Roads has just as much risk as to whether you pay or not pay for the use of the express lanes as 77 express partners do. But the overall package for that corridor included all these other improvements that go along with it. I also should note the use of active traffic management. They also were the first corridor to install active traffic management in Colorado as well. So long way of saying it really comes back to the policy choices that are set at the MPO and by the DOT in trying to determine what it is that you want to see built with those express lines. That answers that question.
You began your presentation, and thank you for being here, by, in a sense, sort of framing this as our future. And, I don't want to let the moment pass without objecting. Not at you, but at the concept, because the idea that Americans have to, pay money just to try to drive on public roads, and the very burdensome amount that this is costing, and the fact that it is essentially functions like a regressive tax, because the less of your household income, the greater percentage this $50 trip is going to bite into your ability to eat and have a roof over your head. It's wrong. It's morally wrong. And it's a function of the people who are serving in the General Assembly not making the right choices. I keep reading about reducing the corporate tax rate and reducing taxes, which of course we'd all like to do, but we have a fiduciary responsibility to the people, which they are, I believe, in dereliction of their duty not to take care of this basic infrastructure and to create a state where only the wealthy can reasonably get anywhere, because sitting in traffic for 2 hours isn't, is really, it's unreasonable on its face, not to mention the expense involved. So I just want to say that to the extent that managed lanes are, coming about in our state and world because of funding issues, I reference the point I've already made, but I do want to ask you, how much of their gaining prominence is related to management of, congestion, and how is it different in 2024, that level of congestion, than it was in the 70s and 80s when I was growing up and nobody had to pay to drive, from one point to another.
So our population has definitely increased substantially since the 1970s and 1980s. And with it, the amount that we travel also per capita has gone up substantially. So not only are there just more people, we're just traveling more per trip than we're doing it, within our households. So all of that together is basically on infrastructure that was built largely in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. So we had infrastructure that was built for that demand way back then, and it got increasingly worse over time because we have increasing levels of demand for that roadway space, but we didn't adequately widen, didn't adequately expand our system in order to accommodate it. The economic imbalance is really all that congestion is an economic imbalance. Now, the part that I think is an interesting question is there a way to do the same way of providing this balance, in terms of the supply and demand of our freeway system without it involving a cost, without it involving a price, without involving a toll? And the answer kind of is yes, because the price is a function of a rationing system. If we used other ways of rationing the space on the freeway facilities, we could accomplish the same goal of restoring congestion. We need to shift demand. There's essentially unlimited demand for the use of our freeways, but we have very limited supply because it costs so much and it takes a lot of resources in order to build more and more supply. One way that we could shift the demand curve without actually doing anything in terms of pricing is to actually limit the number of vehicles that can get onto the freeway. Ramp metering, which has just begun over in Raleigh, for example, is one way to do that. Basically, you put a stoplight at the ramp and you just allow vehicles to go, red, green, red, green, red, green on the green in order to reduce the volume of vehicles entering the facility. The problem for North Carolina for using that as the sole mechanism is we got a lot of trips that are coming from outside of North Carolina where you don't have the ability to regulate that traffic. So if you're coming up from South Carolina on 77, you're already on the facility, whether you've been stopped previously or not. It's harder and harder and harder to increase the level of regulation from ramp metering in order to achieve that same balance to the supply and demand curve. But it should be noted that managed lanes are not just about the use of pricing. That's that right one over there, the express lanes. Well, I guess high occupancy tolls the same way too. The other four, there's no context for pricing in any of those four. Those are still all managed lanes. They're still trying to preserve that freeway capacity, those lanes at a higher level of service. It's instead of using price as a way to access it, you have to ride the bus, or you can only use it during peak periods, or you have to be a truck. Those are different ways of looking at the very same way of rationing that highway space. But that's how we have to get to that relative imbalance one way or the other.
Another quick question. Where do people pull over if they break down if you're using the shoulder for a lane?
In that situation, there are pullouts every quarter of a mile, maybe it's every half a mile or so. It's also dependent upon the interchange spacing. As the gentleman also noted, he'll note that one up in the upper right corner is I-66, and if he also is paying attention to the photo, he'll also note that the collector distributor lane that he had mentioned before is right on the other side. You see this car right here that's on the other side of the bridge pier. That's that collector distributor that is allowing for access on and off the facility itself. So all those contribute as to whether when a car breaks down in those lanes. The other thing I should note about the I-66, and by the way, it does not look like this anymore. They actually rebuilt it and now it utilizes express lanes like I-77. But this was how it existed about 8 years ago. In that facility itself, when the dynamic shoulder lane was active, and you could see by the light when it's active, the leftmost lane became an HOV lane, a carpool lane. So what was previously a general purpose lane now just shifts over to the shoulder, and then that frees up that extra lane on the left side to preserve for HOV. So that was one way that Virginia was able to talk and utilize their roadway space a little creatively. Doesn't have to be that way. It's just the way that they did it.
All right. Mr. Bell?
I want to say thank you also for being here tonight. Good presentation, but I have to agree with each point made with this board tonight. I feel that 77 North is the pricing is out of control. It puts a burden on the folks using it, and I don't want to repeat everything that's been said by each person, but everyone has made a great point. And so I would like to see us do something different. I'd hate for us to make the same mistake on another toll road as Robert said, when you get to the south, 77 South, just don't make the same mistake, just don't do the same thing, because I think that pricing is too much, and to pay these ridiculous prices is just crazy. So I just want to voice support for each comment made.
Mayor Knox?
Well, and I'm going to go ahead and number one, David, thank you so much. The presentation was great, but I've always been a critic of saying that the lanes are to mitigate traffic. And I'm just going to give real life example today because this is my third trip to Charlotte today. This morning I had to drive to the airport. So I got off on the interstate at exit 30 in Davidson where I live. I got off to get on 485 to go to the airport. It cost me $22 to run that section. I came back on 485 to 77. It cost me $14 to get back to Davidson. That was $36 round trip this morning. The one common factor in that, lanes, general purpose lanes, both north and southbound, each time we're at a standstill. I had to be in Charlotte at noon for a meeting today. Downtown, it cost me $19 to get from exit 30 to downtown. It cost me $20 to go back. That's $39. That's $75 I spent today on meetings. Again, common factor, general purpose lanes were at a standstill both times. That's not traffic mitigation for me. I came down here tonight. I had a wonderful drive on Highway 21. I was able to sightsee and still go 45 miles an hour. It didn't cost me a dime. So I understand having the choice to do that. But time is money for too many people. I mean, I went back just now and looked at my bank account, and on June 13th, I was drafted $415. That's my toll bill for the month. The lady that read my chart at the doctor's office today for my noon doctor's appointment can't afford that. And she has to drive from Huntersville to Charlotte because we had that conversation. There has to be a better way to do that. That's not traffic mitigation when I can drive 70 miles an hour because I can afford to, and somebody that's got a job that's barely getting by has to sit in traffic for an hour to go 18 miles. It makes no sense at all.
Yeah, I think exactly what you're talking about is a reason why these different agencies and corridors have experimented with an income program to try to bring affordability to those who rely upon the use of the express lanes. The one I'll point out in particular, the Elizabeth River crossings, this is in the Hampton Roads area of Virginia, they actually place a cap on the total amount per month that a qualifying household can expend. So I think the cap is like $45 or $50. Once you hit that cap, you're not charged again a toll. From if you're a registered low-income household in there.
I'd like to find out if we don't have that, if we could implement some kind of program like that in the existing corridor now, and anything in the future that be addressed, because there are people that got to get to work and can't afford a 2-hour trip one way. So if those fees were greatly reduced by household income or whatever the case may be, I think that would be very commendable to take a look at that.
I think we'll add that to maybe Brett's list to bring back as a question for a future I-77 update, perhaps. I'm looking at him and he's going, yeah, he hasn't moved. But hold on a second.
I will say that if you're interested in those topics, the Washington State Department of Transportation did a ridiculously good job of detailing all the different options for low-income, programs. Their report is available online. I'll be able to send the link to Bob, and he can share it with you as well. That it's very, very well detailed, and it gives you a good idea as to what it would look like applying it to any express lane in the city.
Thank you, Madam Chair. David, yeah, I wasn't going to ask, but since people have brought up the same topic, I just want to ask also. You probably wouldn't be able to answer specifically what does I-77 Mobility Partners do? What is their algorithm? The algorithms are more proprietary and secret than nuclear codes, I think.
Probably right.
But as a layperson who doesn't use I-77 very often, I observe what Councilman Driggs observes, that they're going 70 miles an hour in the managed lanes. There's 3 cars per half mile, and that's it. And maybe they're paying $7 per segment, but it's 3 cars. Do they make mistakes? Or I mean, I would think that I-77 Mobility Partners wants to maximize their revenue, especially since we don't have a cap. So is there really room that somehow their algorithms are actually bad and their algorithms could be giving them more money by lowering the prices? I mean, do you ever see that in a situation where they finally have reviewed their algorithm and said, this wasn't really a good algorithm. We should have been letting more people on there because we're making more money now.
Yeah, so I think that there's always room for improvement in any algorithm. What doesn't matter, transportation or otherwise. And how their parameters are set may not be optimal for the same goals and objectives that you might want them to be. And certainly that's a possibility. The one aspect that I would give caution to when giving the comparisons of general purpose lanes at standstill and express lanes at free flow is it's not just the visuals of the vehicles, but it's also the physics, right? So a vehicle traveling at 70 miles per hour needs greater headway to the next vehicle than a vehicle that's, traveling at 15 miles an hour, because it's just the nature of physics and stopping distance and all that sort of thing. So an express lane that's operating correctly at 75, 60 to 75 miles an hour, they are going to visibly feel a lot emptier than a general purpose lane that doesn't even let's say it's operating at 40 miles an hour, right? That general purpose lane is kind of full, but not super congested, not saturated. The distance between the vehicles are very different because of the speeds. And so as a result, it's going to look a lot emptier, even though they may, if you were to look at vehicle volumes, they might actually be pretty close to each other and the amount of vehicles that are traversing that space per hour.
Thank you. I'm glad I asked, because that certainly is another insight that perception is always a little bit odd, depending on where you are. So that is one possibility. Thank you very much.
I'm going to take a few more questions, and obviously with the popularity, we're going to reserve the right to probably bring you back.
Be happy to do so.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. I think Councilman Driggs hit the nail on the head. I don't think we should have a general purpose lane at a standstill and the other lane, the express lane, going 70 miles an hour. They should be going 45 miles an hour and relieving the dead stop on the general purpose, in my view. So I think that the concessionaire are very smart. I think they're charging the absolute maximum they can to maximize their profit. And also part of that profit package or profit consideration is the wear and tear on the road. So if they have fewer cars on the road, there's less wear and tear, charge a whole lot, have fewer people, and still make a lot of money. So I think in any future iteration, we should be trying to get the express lane more around 45 miles per hour during peak hours to get more people on them. It shouldn't be that people are parked in the general purpose and the managed lanes are going 70 miles an hour, in my opinion.
Ms. Ernestine?
Okay, I wasn't going to say anything, but I want to go back to what Rusty was saying. We, as far as low income, medium income, and high income, the lady that he was talking about may not ever even qualify to get a relief, because we're looking at low income, the numbers, the dollar amount of low income, she may not ever qualify for it. So it looks good on paper. It looks good to say that low income will have an advantage, but you always have that medium that never qualifies for nothing. So we really need to, it needs to be looked at a little more than just saying low income get a cut, because she probably will still be paying the same amount of money that you're paying.
Great point. Councilmember Driggs?
Thank you. I mentioned I lived in Germany for a long time and drove on the Autobahn there. And based on that experience, there was enough room on I-77 to slow down from 150 miles an hour. I'm very interested to hear your suggestion about other tools. Like if we can leave the black box alone, but come up with other criteria, then maybe we don't, have the problem of needing to invade IP. But we need to get across the point that our purpose here is to achieve relief on the general purpose lanes, and that so the deal we strike has got to satisfy that. The only thing I'll mention to everybody here is that as we go in and limit their ability, the contractor's ability to maximize revenue, that has repercussions, right? Like we can't take that revenue off the table without having something else change. And one concern I have is that maybe it turns out that you can't get a deal done. Like we tell them, this is how it has to be. And they say, I can't do it. Not like that. Or it invites a conversation that I expect we will have here about what sort of terms we want and what they can do and how we reconcile those. Thank you.
Right. I just want to add one thing, and then we'll kind of wrap up with this. And again, I think certainly reserve the right to bring him back as we continue these conversations. Is that the fast lane study, and help me out with this, that was done, and everybody talks about relief of general purpose lanes. As I understood from the day one with this, it was about establishing predictable travel time.
That's right.
Not congestion management. So it gets a little clouded over the years of what the true intent of the managed lanes were. So maybe I misunderstood that, and you can help clear that up as a last point.
If you read Fast Lanes Phase 2, you will note that all of the design configurations for each one of these corridors was a single lane in each direction. It was not a corridor rebuild. It was, essentially providing for a single lane. Now, the one exception is US 74. It's a reversible facility for the buses. It's basically how do you take out those barriers and then utilize the extra space for providing it. So it's a little bit different variation on it. But right now, that was the context of Phase 2, right? Now, Phase 2 to today, that was 2009, I believe, is when that was done. 2009 was the end of Phase 2. So we are now 15 years later from that date, and the amount of demand that's been, increasing within the region, it would probably, if we were redoing that fast lane study today, I'm going to say 80% likelihood is that a single lane in each direction would not be sufficient for most of the corridors, that we would be looking at 2 lanes in each direction in order to have some sort of return on investment over the next 30 years. We're halfway in that 30-year horizon from when the Fast Lanes Phase 2 study was done.
Great. Okay, super. Again, thank you so much. I think we've all learned a lot. And again, I'm certain that we'll see you again.
Thank you.
You might be the first speaker that's ever gotten an applause. I'm just going with that, okay? Yeah. Now, Andrew, the pressure's on to see if you can get some applause. We'll move on to our, we definitely hear from Andrew Van Treska in regards to our discretionary grant program.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everybody. I do want to mention something before I start my presentation. With our discretionary grants program, we do have 2 calls each year. The one in the spring is for supplemental funding only on existing projects. The one in the fall is for both supplemental funding and new projects. And I did want to bring that up because a couple slides later, I'm going to hit that point again. Tonight's presentation is for information only. So in July, the board will be asked to approve the supplemental funds for these 2 projects I'm going to hit on, and also the associated TIP amendments. This is basically a table showing the amount of funding we think we're going to have this year for discretionary projects. And as I mentioned at the beginning with our 2 calls, this $40.7 million you see at the bottom, highlighted in yellow, that is for both calls. So whatever comes out of the call in the spring is taken out of that $40.7 million. So that's something you want to remember. Shortfall call trends. This has been the trends the last 4 years regarding the amount of money that we've given for the shortfall call in the spring. As you can see, it's been roughly between $3 and $4 million. This year's ask is actually 7.9, or basically $8 million. So it's almost double what we've given at this time of year over the last 4 years. The 2 projects that have been submitted for the shortfall calls, the first one is the downtown Waxhaw pedestrian improvements. They're asking for an additional roughly $100,000 to complete this project. The second one is the Town of Cornelius Torrance Chapel and West Catawba Avenue project. As you can see, this is the steep ask of this call. It's approximately $7.8 million. So again, the total is roughly $7.9 million for this call that's being asked. The next steps, on July 11th, the TCC will review this and make a decision. And then on July 17th, this board will be able to decide whether to approve the supplemental request or not. And that presentation was short and sweet, and it may not get a round of applause, but it will save you some time. That one sounded better. And as always, I'll open the floor for some questions.
Super. Well, with that resounding appreciation of the presentation, questions, comments? Cornelius, you want to tell us what you're going to do with that $7 million?
Come up and I'll show you sometime. At about 5 o'clock is the best time to come.
I was going to say, I think we all need $50, right? So, other questions? All right. And again, when will the call for the next round start?
It typically opens sometime around the end of August.
Okay.
And then the way it carries out is it's usually the beginning of the next year. The board will make the decision on that call.
Gotcha. So if it didn't submit a project this time, get it in for the fall, right?
That's right.
Questions, comments, anything? Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, on to more great news. Moving on to the 2035, TIP development process. And Travis and Mark are going to bring us the great news for this. And we've got big paper.
Big paper, yeah.
Big paper. Big paper might earn applause. I don't know.
I don't know. I'm a little worried that I might not get applause, but I think Mark.
I guess getting wild. Yeah.
So everyone, thank you all for having us. We have a two-part presentation. I'm going to go over the first, following more of the CRTPO process for P7, and then we're going to get into a little bit of the financials, and then Mark's here to help us kind of understand what all those numbers mean and what it means as a region. So again, I'm Travis Johnson with CRTPO, and I want to talk about project scoring and a little bit of the funding update. Again, Mark's going to give a second presentation to kind of go in more depth. We're going to talk about the P7.0 local input point review. And so what you have in your hand right now is the draft recommendation for local input points, and I'll go into how that was created, and then we'll go over the schedule for public input at the end. And then I'll pause for questions, but then we'll move on to Mark's presentation. I'll stay up here so we can both answer questions as needed. So May 24th, P7.0 scores were released by NCDOT's spot office. Included in that was estimated funding for the statewide mobility, regional impact, and division needs tier. Estimated funding is subject to change due to project costs. So it's important to keep in mind that these numbers are being updated and will be shifted as we move through this process. And also as part of the estimated funding estimate, the NCDOT provided a list of statewide mobility projects that could be funded in 2026-2035 STIP. And so this is their recommended projects for funding. So we break down the funding, 40% goes to the statewide mobility, and we don't have the opportunity for local input points at this tier. So this receives 40%, but we compete against the entire state at this level. So our projects compete against projects in Wilmington, projects in Raleigh, projects in Asheville. For regional impact projects, this is 30% of the funds, and it is divvied up among the regions based upon the population. So we have two regions, Region E and Region F. Region F is Division 12, in addition to other, and then Region E is Division 10, so that's Mecklenburg and Union. And so again, that is divvied up based upon the overall population in addition to the location. So that's where the 30% is distributed. And then the final is the division needs, which we will be addressing in a few months. And that is another 30% of funds, but this is divvied up among the divisions equally. And again, the divisions are still separated with Division 12 and then Division 10, which is Mecklenburg and Union, and Division 12 being Iredell. So for statewide mobility, the recommendation currently is about $1 billion of funding. And with that, we have $600 million being recommended for I-77 South Corridor improvements. And so that's from the Belk Freeway to South Carolina state line. We have $5 million recommendation for I-85 and I-485 interchange next to the airport. And then for I-485 express lanes from I-85 to I-77 is $91.5 million being recommended. And then US 74 widening and Indian Trail in Monroe. And so overall, that's 4 projects being recommended to move forward for highway. In addition to that, we have 2 non-highway projects being recommended, and that's the Charlotte Douglas International Airport, and that's an end-around taxiway. And then the Old Charlotte Highway and Rocky River Road grade separation in Union County. So overall, we were very successful as a region for statewide projects. For the recommendation, I believe there was overall 10 projects recommended across the state, and we received 6 of them. So we were very successful as far as statewide. And again, these projects, we do not have the opportunity for local input points. But the projects in the statewide tier do cascade down, which means we can apply points to them at the regional impact tier as they move through the process. So for regional impact funding for Region E, which is Union and Mecklenburg County, we have negative $471 million for this STIP cycle. And for Iredell, which is Region F, we have $8 million. So those are the funding amounts which we typically utilize for creating the estimates for when we prioritize the local input points. So obviously, we're going to have to come up with some creative solutions through this process. And then for Division 10 and Division 12, for the division needs tier, we have a negative $108 million for Union and MEC and negative $72 million for Division 12. So this is the snapshot as of May 17, 2024. The project scores or project cost estimates are currently being updated. And then Mark will go into more detail about what is included in those numbers, what are the project costs, and just what is causing some of the project escalations. So again, funding amounts are from May 17th, and they will change as part of this process. So to meet federal state fiscal constraint requirements, the draft STIP, scheduled delays for committed projects will need to occur in SEI funding categories with a negative value. So if we have a negative value in those previous fields, some projects will need to be delayed. And then scheduling changes to committed projects may need to occur in the SEI funding categories with a positive value. An email received on June 5th talking about the need. So we still need to go through the local input points process. We have not completely gone through a process since P5, which was in 2018. And so there'd be one of the reasons they stipulated for the need for that to happen is because of the confusion that might happen with some MPOs or some RPOs moving through this process and others not. So we still need to apply our local input points, and we still need to make sure that all the categories receive a recommendation in it through the process. Because there's 21 funding categories that still need to be prioritized for consistency, and also because more money might show up. This is not unheard of. In the past 10 years, this has occurred twice. In 2016, following the adoption of the 2016-2025 STIP and P3, additional funds were made available through House Bill 97. And in 2022, prior to the adoption of the 2024-2033 STIP, additional funds were transferred from a sales tax revenue. So it's essential that we complete this process and we work through and have a recommended list of projects that we want to move forward with, because we don't know what the future holds. We just know what the process is that we have to follow. So for local input points, as a region, we are able to apply for 2,500 points for regional impact projects and 2,500 points for division needs. And those are typically divvied up 85% towards highway projects and 15% towards non-highway. So it's typically 2,125 highway points and 375 non-highway points. And then for the division need, the split is 2,500. So it's 80% or 20% of the total. So in the local input point process that we have adopted as a board, or as the CRTPO, we use the MTP horizon year and the MTP score as our primary mechanism for ranking the project. So we sort the project list based upon the MTP horizon year, which is when we expected it to be open to the public. The MTP score, which is the highest ranking score, means it meets the different categories of congestion, safety, accessibility, employment, historical impacts. And then if it does not have either one of those two metrics, then we revert to the P7.0 score for allocation. So that project list you have in front of you, that's how we sorted the project list. For non-highway projects, we sort it based upon the P7.0 score, and we provide the points based upon the mode. And so the highest ranking project of each mode receives points, and then if there is points left over, then the highest ranking piece by P7.0 score mode would receive points after that. So to allocate these points, we have a P7.0 subcommittee. They met 3 times in June, on June 12th, June 13th, and June 21st, to review the regional impact projects and the cascaded statewide mobility projects. They recommended that we follow the methodology as I've shared with you already, but there were 2 modifications. One was to only consider cascaded statewide mobility projects under 75 million. So if it was a project that was over 75 million, it was recommended not to apply local input points, again, considering the significant number of statewide projects was cascaded this time, just again, because due to the funding availability. And then we also voted to move 25 of the local input points from highway to non-highway, because we have it set up to where it's 2,125, and then 375 points. And so that doesn't allow us to do the full 100-point allocation. So instead of having one highway project with a recommended 25 local input points, we moved that to non-highway so we could have, instead of 75 points, a full 100 points. So we are allocating essentially 2,100 points for 70 highway projects and 19 non-highway projects. So the SDI legislation requires that MPOs use a methodology to assign points based on quantitative and qualitative data and modal allocation. That's why we use the MTP scores. The local input points are given to the MPOs based upon population, which is why we have so many points to allocate. And again, no more than 100 local input points can be applied to one project, which is why we can't put like 1,000 points in one project to really show the priority. In addition to that, we have local input points and NCDOT has local input points. And the projects that get local input points from both CRTPO and DOT have the best chance of then moving up the project list. For the methodology for the CRTPO, we must assign the maximum points are eligible. Points from the division needs tier should not be applied to statewide mobility projects. So those projects that cascaded down to the regional impact list will not cascade down to the division needs, but unfunded regional impact projects or projects that did not receive local input points may cascade down to the division need list, and the additional rules can be set based upon that. We always try to coordinate with divisions to achieve mutual point assignment because that gives us the best chance of moving a project and getting the most points available. And then the board may divert from this recommended methodology again based upon public comment, which will be coming back next month to ask to open a public comment period to when we'll then collect feedback, and then that'll be an opportunity to move local input points as needed. So the schedule for milestones, right now we're in June going through the process of creating this draft regional impact list. We'll be coming back in July to open a public comment period from July 18th to August 1st, and then come back for action in August. And then for the division needs tier, we'll do a similar process, creating the list in September, coming back in October to open a public comment period, and then coming back for a recommendation in November. And this is all to meet the deadline to have a draft STIP in time for January of 2025. So with that, I'll take a brief moment to see if we have any questions. And then I'm going to still be up here if you want to think about it for a little bit, so Mark can give a presentation on the financial side.
Any questions right now before we go? Yes, Lee.
So I'm looking at this graph that was provided. I appreciate it. And it reminds me of a conversation that I had with staff about a year ago. I was asking about the Davidson exit at 3A. For those who live in Charlotte, you basically have to merge like 5 lanes on a curve. Mm-hmm. The curve is going left, but the exit is here, and you've got about 1/8 of a mile, 1/16 of a mile to do it in. Mm-hmm. So we call it the death exit in my household. And what staff very kindly took the time to demonstrate to me is that it's not even in the top 10 of fatal crash interchanges. And so my question, and they provided to me a list of the top 10 interchanges with the most incident of fatal crashes per capita. Mm-hmm. And so what I would like to know is, this kind of data is what I'm hoping and expecting gets top priority when making a list for changes and fixes. So does it?
So as I've said previously, so we use the 2050 MTP methodology, which one of the methodology is safety congestion. I don't know specifically about that intersection. I was not part of that email exchange, so I'm not sure what the status would be of that, but we do take in consideration safety. And again, that's why it's so important now as we're working on the 2055 MTP to work with us through that process, kind of help us work with that for prioritizing projects, because that directly informs what projects then move on to the tip next.
Well, I wasn't even asking about the one I raised because staff already apprised me that it's not even on the top 10 list. So I'm asking, are the things that are on the most dangerous intersections where there's a high incidence of death, like how important does that drive? Because that should, to me, be the overriding criteria for what gets prioritized, where people are dying because there's a design flaw.
Right. So we have to follow the methodology that was approved by NCDOT and by this board, which is to rank the projects based upon the MTP score. I can find that information out for how that is ranked, but our methodology was approved previously by a different this board, but a different board, which is the methodology we've been following to this point. And so that methodology is then approved by NCDOT, and that's what we have to follow as part of this process. We can deviate. And so if citizens have concerns about individual intersections or projects that are on that list through public comment, you can choose to re-divert local input points. But at this phase in the process, we're supposed to follow the methodology.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions right now? Okay, if not, we'll continue with the presentation. Mark Stafford's part.
Seriously.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. I am Mark Stafford, Division 12 engineer. And so I have the unenviable task tonight of talking about our P7.0 funding availability. So basically there's 4 components that go into the funds that we have for programming and in our STIP in this next phase. So you have the initial allocation, which is based on our consensus revenue forecast from both the state and the federal level. The amount reserved for inflation, obviously you can see here that our Board of Transportation in May of 24 has changed that. Previously it was less, obviously with the world we live in today and inflation that we all see. So now we're holding 5% annually for the first 5 years, and then 500 million each year after that through the remainder of years 6 through 10. There's also a variance adjustment. We call that the look back law. Basically everything that has been budgeted through the funds, and then they look at what's been authorized by the Board of Transportation. So you will see in the next couple of slides, some of those are in the negative and some of those are positive. And then you've got the amount committed in the 26 to 35 STIP. So once a project is committed and those funds are programmed, it pays out over multiple years, and that's shown on the next slide as far as where the funding goes for how much we have programming. And as Travis kind of alluded to, the numbers are fairly bleak. So for Region E, you can see that the initial allocation is 2.39 billion, inflation there, and then the 509 is the variance that I was talking about. So that's the difference between what was budgeted previously and what has been authorized to date. So to date, there's 509 million that has not been authorized. So that is folded back into the ledger sheet. And then you look at how much has been committed in the 26 to 35 STIP. So right now that's 3.5 or 3.05 billion. So that's where that minus 471 million comes from. Region F, which is divisions 11 and 12, you can see the numbers there. And as was mentioned, that $8 million is reflective back to May the 17th. So as we get updated cost estimates, we expect those to change. You'll also see on there that there's some positive ones, right? So if we were looking at divisions 5 and 6, Region C, you can see there their allocation, which is based on population. That's how that's derived. They start with 2.5 billion minus the inflation. Their adjustment is 133 million, but they've only got committed right now 1.35 billion. So that's the difference. They haven't programmed or committed all of their funds, whereas regions E and F have done that to date. So here we go to the division tier. All divisions get $807 million for the programming. All the inflation's the same. You go back to the variance here in Division 10, you've got 15 million to the positive, and you can see Divisions 12. And then you look at what's committed. Obviously, we have a lot of projects that are committed both in Divisions 10 and 12, and so we're sitting at 108 and 72 respectively in the red.
Why is the initial allocation not based on population?
So all divisions in the STI legislation, all divisions get an equal share. So the regions, it's based on population. So right where you have more population, there's more funding. But all divisions, based on the law, get the same amount of funding.
That's hard.
So what does that mean? So when we look at our cost increases, obviously we do our cost estimates at least every 2 years. And for this cycle, all the committed statewide projects have already had updated estimates. So when Travis was talking about the projects that made the new funding based on the new estimates and having the little over $1 billion to program. We're doing that now for the regional impact projects, and we'll be doing that for the committed division projects as well by fall. So we've got the latest information so that when we know, when we look at that variance, where we're really standing. So we continue to refine our estimating, obviously with the inflationary factors that we've seen in the last few years, the impacts to our projects and the cost increases have been substantial. So what does that mean? So obviously our divisions have negative numbers. So basically that's telling us that there are no new projects that are going to be programmed for funding in P7.0. Then all the non-committed projects will become unfunded. And there's a possibility that some committed projects may have to be delayed, depending on how and how much and the buckets that those are in. So this last piece, yesterday there was some new guidance that came out from us, and that actually went to each MPO when we're talking about additional opportunity to provide some input to the process. If you remember back to the last time we did this, we had the swap options. This time we're looking at getting your input now, which spreadsheets went out to each MPO. So CRTPO got a spreadsheet. Basically, for each for each bucket, division tier and regional tier, you've got your committed projects listed. They're based on the seniority approach, which is what the work group has mentioned, which is what we followed last time. And so that's the P3, P4, and P5, depending on which year they were programmed, through which year prioritization. What the opportunity is to rank your preference in those projects. If you have projects that were committed in P4, but you would rather have that versus a P3 in seniority process, that spreadsheet and that coordination is what we've allowing the process to take place. As part of that, the MPOs will rank their projects, and if you choose not to or choose not to change them, it will go to the seniority approach. And the divisions will do the same thing. We'll look at that. And as part of this, the division and the MPO need to be like-minded in that to be able to make a suggested change. If not, it reverts back to the seniority approach. So we expect that to take place, probably through your TCC in the next iterations, to take a look at that information and see if there's an opportunity to make some guidance suggestions about how you'd like to change the current committed projects. So here's the current schedule, obviously, that we're working on. The regional input points assignment are open until August 30th. At the end of September, you will see those come out, and we will go to the division input point assignments that Travis talked about, and then that will conclude in January of 25. We have the new draft STIP. I know that's a lot of tough news there to take on, but what questions have you got as far as funding or where we're at with P7.0?
No applause for you.
Math.
That's what I was afraid of. I thought we could clap before when I first got up here, but yeah, it's I drew the short straw, you could say. So thank you for recognizing.
So,
all right, so let's kind of start with Mayor Murray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So it sounds like older projects or projects that have been on the priority list longer will likely stay funded. And you were saying going back to P2.
So that's where it goes into that input, right?
Okay.
Some areas will have older projects that are no longer their primary or their highest preference.
It's fallen off their priority, yeah.
It has. And we see that in some of the programming already today that you see in the current STIP. Some of the P3s are farther out in the current STIP than maybe a P4.
But it sounds like stuff that's on the P6, maybe P5, those are potentially up for grabs or under question, under review at least.
Yes, typically you would think that the ones that were the last ones to make it in the STIP could be the most at risk.
Okay.
I did just confirm with Bob that staff did get that email of the list, the older projects, and we'll get that out.
Yeah.
at least by tomorrow. Other questions? I've seen several hands. Ed?
So the General Assembly keeps talking about how to try to address the shortfall and this sort of process of not having money. They did transfer $600 million from the general fund. Is there any active conversation now? I've heard the speaker enumerate like a whole bunch of possibilities that have been considered and then reasons why they didn't work or whatever, but is there any hope for more revenue?
That's a great question. Obviously, I think that's what's facing, our General Assembly and all of us is how and do we fund transportation? What does that look like? I'm not aware of any new bills that have been introduced, but that is you can see it from the revenue. That's how much we're forecasted in federal and state revenue, and that's how far we think it's going to go based on the projects that are currently committed.
Thank you.
Other questions? Mark? Is there any good news that you can maybe get a clap for? Anything that you can give to us? That you're done?
My presentation is complete.
There you go.
He forgot we have 6 of the 10 statewide projects.
Hey, so there you go. There you go. That's great news. Moving on to more great news. Brett, can I bring us an I-77 corridor update? Pressure's on because you're the last presentation, and you got to do something to earn a clap. Just the contest.
I'm not optimistic. Unfortunately. Good evening, everyone. Again, Brett Knife, NCDOT Division 10. I'm here to give you guys another I-77 corridor update. Get started here. So tonight we're going to cover a couple things that you guys have already seen, a little bit of that project overview, even some of that background information that David presented earlier. We're going to talk about that history just a little bit quickly, and then one little quick slide to recap what you just heard from Travis and Mark about state funding specific to the I-77 South project this time, and then an update on the comparative analysis. And that's where we've been working to come up with, just a comparison between a P3 delivery option of I-77 South versus a traditional toll delivery. So again, this project it runs again from the South Carolina state line up to I-277 in Charlotte. You guys have seen this slide before, but it's still in that same family of projects that was identified, years ago through this board in a fast lane study, and then has gone through iterations of the STIP process as well. We showed you guys an updated estimate amount of $4.2 billion. The last time we presented, that was very fresh, very new information. We didn't have a lot of time to make any refinements to that. So maybe that's one good bit of news. We have gone back through and looked at that. We think we've got that estimate down just a little bit, which we'll get into a little bit of that detail as we progress. So again, the history of I-77 South, it did start way back in 2007 with, as part of that fast lane study. This project, this corridor was identified as a managed lanes corridor. And this project made it into the STIP several years ago, beginning in P3.0 back in 2014. And we had done quite a bit of work on the project since that time, especially in the last few years where we've really been working hard to generate cost estimates, project concepts. We've been working with the city of Charlotte, reviewing those of what this project will look like. And all the way up until just a few years ago, we received the unsolicited proposal from Centra to widen I-77 South. Essentially, it was the same project. And so we all kind of concluded, we didn't really need to do anything with that, but we did take off on this comparative analysis process, which this board asked us to do. So, but the last thing that has happened, as Mark showed you and Travis talked through as well, this project was selected for funding. It was identified for funding in P7.0. at $600 million. And you guys know that that's not quite enough to cover all of this project costs. So talk a little bit about the state funding. We programmed this at $600 million. That's really close to what the corridor cap would be. You guys have heard me talk about the corridor cap before. You know, it limits our ability to input more funds into a segment, a corridor that spans divisions and counties. And so 600 million was a sort of a safe conservative number that we could apply to that. But you can see that just the available amount of funding was just over $1 billion. And so, you know, that's a significant portion of the funds available for all statewide tier projects across the state in this particular STIP. So, and then as you guys have already seen, our region for divisions 8 and 10, region E, we had a negative amount of money. Same thing in the division needs category for division 10, a negative amount of money available for programming. So that's not the best information, but that is what we're working with. That's part of our constraints. So on with the comparative analysis update. We have been working on this since last year when you guys asked us to complete this process. I will say it's been iterative. It's progressed. And then, you know, we worked on all these things, defining objectives to start with, setting up priorities, obviously the constraints. We've talked about the financial and physical constraints of this corridor, and then the risk you know, that the private sector could take on if this project were to move forward as a P3 or the state and those risks. So what we're doing now is completing the qualitative and quantitative analysis pieces, and we do have some initial findings to report later on in the presentation. So the qualitative analysis, the non-financial factors, when we stack up a traditional toll delivery versus a P3 toll delivery, if you're counting check marks, you know, we're pretty close to a tie. You've heard a little bit about competition from David's presentation. We think that there would probably be a little more competition if this were delivered as a traditional toll project. That's simply got a lot to do with the fact that there's not a lot of players in this field. I mean, you're talking about a global market and not, you know, a lot of local folks. To be honest, though, even in a traditional toll delivery, a project of this size is going to be very limited. If it were one project that stood alone, a project of this size would be extremely hard for, you know, any one firm or team to even bond to consider building. So the competition there wouldn't be what we would see with an average highway project, I would say. Innovation, and I think that's probably, in my opinion, the most value that we'll see out of a P3 option is how to deliver this project. How can you deliver this project more efficiently? How could it be done cheaper? And how could the financial model work? The program flexibility, obviously, if NCDOT and NCTA are delivering this project, we don't have that third party, right? So we think we're going to do better with flexibility. Our capacity obviously increases if we've got a partner. The public sentiment, obviously, you know, the comments we've heard from this room over the years, you know, there's more concern with a P3 delivery option from a public sentiment. And I think, you know, everyone here understands that at this point. And so, but, you know, the regional economic benefits, you know, at the end of the day, we can deliver a project with either option. We expect a similar outcome there. So financial factors, you know, P3 delivery, obviously you've got more checks on the right on that column than a traditional toll delivery. And a lot of that has a whole lot to do with risk transfer. You know, a project of any size has its inherent risk. There's a lot of unknowns that you can find in construction. A project of this size is for certain going to have more potential risk than, you know, a smaller project, right? So by sharing those risks with a P3 concessionaire, it performs better in this comparison. contractual issues, right? If we just have a, a traditional design build type contract, that's not nearly as complicated as a concession agreement that we would have with a concessionaire. We do have a little bit of experience that now with the 77 Mobility Partners contract. And certainly it's a complex, very large, takes two big, thick notebook binders if you want to print it all out contract. And so we know that it's a little more complicated there. But all these other items, the operation, maintenance, life cycle, project delivery, finding ways to, kind of fill in this financial gap we might have when we're looking at the math of the whole deal. There's P3 option would bring more to the table. And of course the revenue risk, right? In a P3 model, even if this were traditional turnpike delivery, there's going to be an assumed amount of revenue that would come in from this managed lanes project. And, the state would bear that risk. In the P3 option, the concessionaire would bear that risk instead. So that's what it looks like when you stack them up. So where we're at, when we brought the new cost estimate in, that certainly did change our inputs. Obviously, that's going to greatly impact any model, the revenue that you would need to be able to generate in order to offset that financing, that debt, that changed. And so, we have been working to overcome that. But I'm here tonight to present these preliminary findings. And you're going to see here in just a minute that there is a funding gap, right, with what I'm calling a base case model. And that base case is going to be the traditional toll delivery. And then we've done this analysis on the P3 option, and it's still going to tell us that there's a little bit of a gap. So we're going to be looking at ways to optimize that. That's going to hopefully it's going to have to involve some construction revisions, some changes to the current plans. It's going to have to involve some other way to bring revenue to the table that would then allow the financing to occur. But so, we've talked about coming back in July, potentially August with these final findings. We're going to be doing our best to get back as soon as possible with that. So the total construction cost right now, we've brought that down to $3.8 billion. We did that by taking a really hard look at the right-of-way cost with the current plans. And again, when we brought that information forward, it was very new, right? But we knew right away that we had to try to find ways to optimize that. And so we looked at ways to reduce the right-of-way impacts and make sure that we weren't being too conservative. Because initially, when you're at this stage of a project and design, you do need to be a little bit conservative. But in this case, we knew we had to take a deeper dive, which we did. And so we were able to save a significant amount of money, or at least projected to, on the right-of-way side. The assumptions we're making here is if, we could start work with, a P3 or a traditional project in 2026, roughly 7.5 years of design and construction time. There is a variation in the model between the traditional toll delivery and P3 delivery in terms of that timeline, because we could get started a little bit quicker with a P3. And also, it's probably important to note that, this comparison, it shows us what could be if the money were available, right? We've already said that there was $600 million that would just got committed for P7. And we've talked in the past about corridor caps and things of that nature. So our comparative analysis, realistically, it's making a comparison of what we could do should that money become available, right? We're completing that traffic and revenue forecast with these additional sensitivities, with, really talking about things like commercial vehicles, ways to bring revenue, as I've described, and ways to reduce costs by, somehow, shrinking the footprint, optimizing designs, right? So all of these, all of these components have gone into this analysis to this point. And you know, I think, let me just go on and get to this next slide. Really, I think this is where we get into the meat of what we're here to talk about. So total project cost, when you project out through that 7.5-year term, when you're talking about adding in inflation, factoring in contingencies, which those vary between the two delivery methods, you can see the total project cost in the future year is around $5 billion for a traditional toll delivery versus 4.5 for a P3 delivery. So again, we are working hard to refine what our project could look like and what these models could look like. You know, as I said, we were able to save a significant amount of money based just on that initial review of the right-of-way cost. I think there's a lot more work to be done in that area in terms of value engineering some of these concepts that we've got in front of us. So that's going to be ongoing, as well as the additional traffic and revenue analysis, right? Ways to bring more funding, more revenue to make this whole math pencil out, to make the deal pencil out. So all that's going to be going on. Hopefully we'll get back to you guys again in the next month or two with the rest of the information. But all of this added up when we started talking about that total project cost, you know, the year of delivery, then the amount of funds that you could bring in, where you could estimate would be brought in from a traditional toll versus a P3 toll. And, you know, those numbers, that net cash flow, there's a pretty big delta there. That has a whole lot to do with how conservative you can be on the traditional toll side versus the P3 side. You know, equity investors have a lot higher risk tolerance. And so you're able to project out greater cash flows. The STIP funding stays the same for both versions of delivery. But at the end of the day, right now, from this base case analysis, we think we've got around a $3.5 billion funding gap for a traditional delivery and a $2.3 billion gap on a P3 delivery. So what that means with the base case, this first iteration of analysis, that there's a sizable amount of money that we would have to figure out how to come up with, right? That's either by reducing cost and probably a combination of reducing cost and finding ways to increase revenue. And right now, you know, that's probably the most important thing that we're working on, to get back in front of you guys, to see if we can present options that would come closer to closing that funding gap. And that's this is the initial preliminary findings that we've been working on for several months now. So we're going to complete this process. We're going to bring it back to you guys later this summer. Again, not totally sure on the timeline, hopefully the next month or two. But then we're going to ask you guys to consider those findings. You know, and I know there's been a lot of conversation in the room tonight. It's been ongoing really for years now about what's the best next steps for us to take collectively. And you know, what we're going to be talking about is a project delivery option for an express lanes project, right? So that's going to be a decision that we're going to ask the board to make, but we have to bring some more information in front of you before we're ready to ask that question. So open the floor up for questions if you guys have any.
Good. Ed, go ahead.
Well, guys, we were applauding before. Should we boo this guy?
Yeah.
Really appreciate the work you're doing. I'm going back to my sort of simple understanding of what we were looking at, which was state-funded. What does traditional toll mean? Are you talking about a toll road, or is that state-funded road like a highway project?
both models are comparing a managed lanes project, just as we know it today in the STIP.
Okay, so the state
Express
funded
lanes in each
version would also
direction.
be a managed lane road.
Yes.
Like 485 South?
Sure, that's right.
Okay. So you kind of qualified a couple of things you said in a way that to me were pretty devastating. And we can continue this ritual dance, but we're looking at a pretty simple, big problem, right? Now, I was talking before about how if we limit the revenue model that a contractor can use, you could get to a point where it just doesn't work.
It's
And
true.
I think what I hear you saying is that even if they're allowed to maximize their revenue, whatever, we can't see that it would work with a P3. Is that what that shortfall number is?
So that's what the shortfall with the model we've ran right now. It shows a funding gap, right? So that's correct. We're going to have to figure out, are there ways to bring more revenue to the table and to reduce cost? So what you said earlier tonight, you know, this is exactly what you're speaking of. You know, would there be a scenario where you, if you do go with some type, we figure out a way to put a cap on these tolls and control all these concerns and legitimate concerns. I totally understand that, but certainly it could influence whether or not the deal could work, right?
That's what I mean. It's like, you know, you can maximize revenue, but you can't do more than that. At some point, people just won't use the road because the prices are too high. So I imagine if you ran scenarios, revenue models and so on, you could conclude that there is no revenue model that actually covers this cost. And it sounded to me like that's sort of what you were saying.
So based on the current analysis we've performed to date, but what we're doing is we're trying to refine that analysis. And that definitely would mean bringing additional revenue, but it also means cutting down costs. And that's how we close that gap potentially. But I think it's finding, I think the commercial vehicle component is going to be a big part of that.
But it's not a tweak, right? I mean, you're looking for $2 billion.
That's right.
Completion date was one of the key things that we talked about, right? And you mentioned that you were sort of sidestepping the issue of the state funding. Before we looked at completion date somewhere in the 2030s for the P3 and 2045 or later for the traditional toll model. It sounds like what you're saying now is that could be 2087.
Well, I didn't put the date on it, but it could certainly be farther out there. Yes. And this was an apples to apples comparison, assuming they could be delivered in a similar timeline. And that's so we could determine what the value is, right? Is which one would make the most sense if the money was there.
So I guess all I'm saying is if we're staring at a brick wall here, we don't need a lot of detailed analysis. We need a sort of big picture thing. Like I don't think you're going to squeeze $2 billion in costs out or whatever. I'm not sure what the best way is to proceed based on what we're being told right now.
Councilman, we're looking at every way to save money that we can, including some design exceptions that might allow us to leave some of the interchanges in place. For example, if you can save an urban interchange, you're saving north of $100 million, and so that's the kind of level that we're looking at right now.
No, I appreciate what you have done and what you are doing, but I'm just saying we could be back here in a couple of months staring into an abyss. So I guess that's all I'll say right now. I just don't know what to suggest.
Mayor Higdon?
Yeah, a couple questions. The slide you had about toll collection showed traditional toll, or if the state did it, being about $700 million less than a P3. Can you elaborate more why that is? And also, does your model factor in the fact that that money is staying within the state? The tolls are going to be available to pay off debt and not going to a foreign country or a P3 entity that's not the state?
So, yeah, I'll try to answer that one at a time. So the traditional toll delivery in this model is a more conservative approach. There's that just the fact that you're bringing equity into the equation in the P3 approach allows for a more aggressive approach. But as we know it today, we're trying to be very conservative to start out with, because that's the traditional toll project, right? That's how, that's how we've currently been operating. Start out with a conservative approach, and then you may have to, make changes over time if that initial model doesn't work. And right now there is that funding gap. So,
but why would you assume a more liberal approach for the P3? Are you saying there are more people, or
innovation that we haven't seen to date? Not to say that we couldn't get there with the traditional toll delivery project, but with a P3 model, those folks are going to be interested in delivering that project as efficiently as possible and bringing as much revenue to cover the debt and the financing that they're taking on. So they historically, we know this industry to be more, more aggressive with their financial assumptions. They're going to be assuming more revenue than we would in the state model, because they're going to optimize all that.
So again, does your model account for the fact that this money is coming back to the state?
So this is just dollars for dollars.
That's a huge difference. Well, if we're getting 0.9 billion and it's coming back to the state.
Well, so it would be, it'd be going to, if the state were to deliver it, right, it would be also taking on debt to do it. And so we'd have to repay that debt.
Sure.
Just as a P3 concessionaire would have to repay their debt and then pay their shareholders.
Oh, okay. The other question is a similar question. You showed that a P3 can deliver the facility for $500 million less than we can. Why are we so less efficient than the P3 is?
So it's an assumption right now, particularly on what we would call an alternative technical concept. So if we went forward with the project as we know it today, with the current designs, we would put that out on the street as sort of this base project, and we would expect folks to find ways that we haven't seen yet to innovate and to save costs. And so it is an assumed amount of money.
But again, you're saying that P3 can do it for a lot less than we can?
I'm saying they would most certainly be motivated, right? They would.
Why aren't we motivated?
Well, we are, and we would work to do the same thing. We would work to refine and deliver the project in the most optimal, most cost-efficient way possible. But I would expect, as we see here with this type of funding gap, that something, as Councilman Driggs pointed out, something would have to change in order to close that gap. And I think that would be part of it.
Yeah, I don't mean to be negative. I really appreciate all the work that you've done, but I voted against doing this analysis to start with because it seemed like a foregone conclusion that the P3 was going to come out as way superior option. 2087 for a delivery versus whatever. The numbers are more favorable. It just seems like, we're just spinning our wheels and it's going to come back. Hey, P3 is, the way to go 100%. So I kind of question why we're still spending so much time and effort on this when it seems a foregone conclusion that unless Raleigh changes the rules, P3 is what we have to do. We don't have any choice. So it just seems like we're kind of, I don't know. I think this kind of detailed exercise is just kind of wasteful in my view, because the conclusion is clearly going to be P3 is superior option.
Okay, thanks. Lee?
Well, I'm not sure that it's at all clear that it's the superior option. It may be the only option available because of political decisions in Raleigh. Yes. What I would like the next time we have a presentation on this is for a methodical fleshing out of what would be the financial and non-monetary benefits to the public if it was publicly funded. Because as Mayor Higdon was hitting on, if the public still owned it, and benefited from, the profit that's made, and theoretically would seek to achieve less profit because we would just want to try to break even to benefit the public. There's a whole lot of monetary benefits and control benefits. Like, we have no transparency into how the pricing is set. We have, appreciate them coming here, but it took a lot to get them to come here. It's not the same level of transparency if this was government run. So there are a lot of, I would like a graph that details the financial benefits and non-financial benefits if it were publicly funded, because I don't feel that page 97, can we go back to that, is fully capturing the benefits to a traditional toll. You're only talking about the outlay to build it.
Yeah.
You're not talking about the other benefits. And also, I think there's been some good questions raised about some of the assumptions in here. But I want a graph that contains the full picture of the financial benefit and cost to the public, because this only is outlays. You see what I'm saying? It's not talking about once it's built and tolls start getting charged and we start repaying the debt, and then one day the debt is repaid and we're still charging tolls and we get to benefit, and the public gets to benefit from those profits if it were public. But it doesn't occur that way if Centra's running it. So I would like to have greater clarity around that.
I think we can work on something like that for sure. I might even want to get just to touch base with you to make sure that we're pursuing it in the way that you're asking, to make sure I understand the question. So I would follow up with that. We might get a couple questions together and try to help answer it. But I would say that, this is what we're talking about. And I think David Ungema's presentation really, it tried to just explain what this is. This is a concept to manage a corridor, to manage these lanes. There will be costs associated with that. It is the project that we know it today. It's the project that was approved by this board, that was become a part of our STIP. So we're just trying to show what it would take to deliver that project that's been collectively decided that that's what this area wants.
I understand that.
And there will be, in any scenario, funds that would come back to the state. So there would be public benefit, because, this isn't, again, it's not like the Monroe Expressway, or some project, a toll project where you could theoretically potentially pay it off someday. This is, would be an ongoing managed project, and some of those funds do come back to the state. So you've got a pricing plan that would have to repay the debt, and it would have to cover the minimum 45-mile-an-hour speed limit. And I know there's a lot of conversation about that, whether or not the algorithm is right. But at the end of the day, those charges in an express lane would have to be high enough to maintain your speed limit, right? So in order to do that, you've got to have a way to, those funds aren't just all going overseas or just all going to this P3 contractor. Just like in the 77 North model, some of those funds will eventually come back to the state.
Yes, and I do understand that it's going to be a managed lane because of decisions of our predecessors. The question is, who fronts the money to build it? And what I'm saying is that I think that this graph doesn't reflect totally the benefit to the public if it was publicly funded and not by a private entity that then gets to take the profit away, because clearly there's profit.
Sure.
And so we don't know how much the profit is. And I think that we are not clear on what that profit could do to reduce the ultimate cost to the public, because you're not backing the profit. You're not returning the profit to this metric here. Okay. I'm glad someone understands me.
I understand.
Even if you don't.
I think I hear you. I think I know exactly what you're asking for.
Okay, great. And then the other thing, I'm sorry, page 99, real fast. What is the time period of the cash flow generated that you have arrived at 5 billion? Like, is this 10 years, 5 years, 20 years?
So it's an assumed 7.5-year schedule for design and construction that would start in 2026.
Okay, but it'll be operated after 7 years. So why limit the total cash flow generated to just 7 years? That's not going to stop operating and generating at that point.
So no, that's the net cash flow over the life cycle, the 50-year term of a contract.
Oh, so this is for 50 years, not 7.
Right. I apologize. I misunderstood.
Okay.
What you were asking.
Thank you, Mayor Qualls.
Great. Mr. Helms, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I've got a question regarding value engineering. You threw that term around a little while ago, and I'm familiar. I'm certainly familiar with that term in other facets of, say, construction. It's been my experience that when you start tossing around buzzwords like value engineering, that really what you're talking about is losing value on a project, because what is at the heart of value engineering is substituting the proper materials for something that could be inferior. The question I've got is number one, what does that look like with a road project? Yeah. I mean, obviously, we can sit here and we can talk about elements of construction, and we can say, well, you can substitute this piping for that piping, or you can substitute this material for that material. But what exactly are you substituting for a road project like this? And then the second part of that is, how would that affect the life expectancy of the project? Third part of it is, what are the realistic cost savings by doing something like that?
So I think at this point, what we're talking about is scope, right? It's not substituting a material type for another. Obviously, we would do that at the right point in time. You would always try to find the most economical way to deliver a project and not compromise that life cycle expectancy. But we're talking about things like, I think I may have mentioned to you guys before that our current concept would rebuild every interchange essentially from here to South Carolina state line, with the exception of I-485. That interchange would primarily stay in place with some modifications. But in all cases, right now, we're talking about only bridges, only ramps. That has to get wider. And so, the first thing to do would be to figure out how to avoid that, in my opinion, right? I mean, each of these interchanges, I'm sure you're familiar with the corridor. It just, everything's really close up to the right of way. Any expansion creates extreme right of way cost and construction cost. Constructability is an issue in an urban corridor like this. How do you maintain traffic flow? When does all this work occur? It's that type of minimization as opposed to substituting material type or an inferior material type. And so it's really more about scope at this point.
Okay. And so we're not talking about a reduction in life expectancy, then we're talking about minimizing the scope.
Right.
But in doing so, I mean, obviously there's going to be many different options as to how you minimize that scope. Any idea about how that could look if we perhaps do some of the things that you have mentioned? I mean, how much cost savings are we looking at?
Well, we don't have that exercise completed, but it's obvious that we need to look very hard and make particular considerations. And some of that can be just like at what we would call a design exception, where you might have more narrow lanes in a segment, for example, to avoid having to replace an entire bridge. Things like that.
Thanks, sir.
Yes.
Other questions? Mayor Knox?
Yeah. Brett, thank you for the presentation. I've got a couple questions. Number one, when you look, our contract with Centra, if I'm not mistaken, is a profit sharing contract. At some point, there will be a portion that comes back, but you look at the cost to build versus the cost to maintain, and the cost to build far exceeds the cost to maintain. So before I go any further with this, I want to see where we're at. I want to see where we're at with the profit sharing with Centra today, after, what are we, 12 years, 13 years into this now? So we probably have come close to paying the debt. So are we at the profit sharing point now? I think my biggest argument has always been that the amount of money that comes back to the state on this is far deficient, and they're able to capitalize on that because we're in a position where we can't do it, and we have to rely on them to do it. And so they are the drivers in this thing in terms of what profit comes back to the state. Because again, when you look at this southern section, it's a 15x multiplier compared to what we spend on 77 North. it's $337,000 or $337 million a mile versus $23 million a mile. Now I know you've got bridges and things like that to figure in, but still a 15x multiplier it just blows my mind that it's that different in a 10 or 12 year period. It's just I can't fathom that. But the amount of profit that comes back and how expeditiously that money comes back to the state has to be part of a negotiable item moving forward. If you're going to talk to somebody, particularly to the question that was asked earlier, how many players are in the game? Well, we had this unsolicited bid and we were able to force the hand. We all knew it was Centra, but we were able to say, we're not going to talk about it until we find out who it is. And we knew who it was. But I think moving forward, if you've only got one player in the game, maybe you don't play the game. Maybe just figure out something else. And I don't know what that else is, but, again, I'll go back to what Lee teed off on earlier too, is the affordability for people that need to get somewhere and can't. And I'll go back to my $75 I spent today. That's ludicrous that I spent $75 to make 2 trips to Charlotte. And I'm not going to go home on the tolls tonight. I'm going to take 21 and go right back again. But we got to figure out a better way. We've got to have better negotiators at the table. And we've got to figure out a way to get more players in the game.
Just a couple follow-up comments. So, I agree. I mean, we want competition in all of our projects, right? I mean, that's going to help meter cost. I mean, it's just common sense. And I can tell you that there has been interest expressed by some of those other firms. And so right now, I can't tell you for sure, but, we would expect that we would have a competitive process, with folks actually being interested in this project if we move it forward. That's going to be dependent upon, does everybody agree with our revenue models if it were to go out for bid, so to speak. And back to the I-77 question, yes, I-77 is expected to start generating enough revenue that some of that money is going to start coming back to the state, potentially even this year. It's not large sums of money at this point, but it could be in the future, right? So that could definitely go to a public benefit. We just have to figure that out when when that time comes. But I-77 South, it's going to be its own project, right? It's going to have its own financial requirements. And I agree that we need to negotiate, if we go that route, the absolute best deal possible, right? And that would mean, ensuring that profits weren't just flying out the door, that the taxpayers were paying all that. Some of that would come back to the state if the math would allow it to, right? So at the end of the day, we're going to have to, we'll have to find out, is this project, is it feasible, right? And on the financial side, and I'm still optimistic that we'll get to some positive outcome, but we're still working on that.
Mr. Osborne.
Yeah. So I keep staring at the net cash flows here, and it hit me the first time, and I still can't get over it. The difference here, we're essentially saying that someone else can double the net cash flows, almost, not exactly double. I can't imagine another situation in any other industry where someone, a business, an entity, an organization would be willing to say someone else can do this twice as good as I can for $700 million and just be okay with it. For $700 million, if it's the innovation, if it's the people, if it's, the management, if it's the funding, it just seems like, there'd be a little bit more understanding and effort to try to narrow that gap. And maybe it's just my lack of knowledge of what that $700 million represents. So for me, it'd be extremely helpful to see some breakout of what that is. Does that come in the financing of it? Like, is 600,000 or 600 million of that financing? Where is that difference? Because it's so large.
Yeah, I don't want to dispute any of that. I mean, it's definitely a large number. It's a large difference, and we recognize that too, which is why we're saying we've got to refine this, right? This is an initial model. It's a base case model. It's, very, very conservative on the traditional delivery side. But again, it's a model right now. So I don't disagree. We got to find ways to bring that closer together.
So for an apples, I mean, I guess one thing we would expect to see is an apples to apples comparison. Maybe that's where you're going with it. I mean, how can you compare, an aggressive model with a conservative model? Either we should show a conservative model from their side with a conservative model from our side, or an aggressive model from our side with an aggressive model from their side.
And we could get into some of that.
Right. Because
no
you can't compare, two totally different premise and scenarios and say that it's a comparison, right? It's really not at that point.
Well, it's a comparison that clearly shows a difference in the two alternatives. But I don't disagree that that's a big number. In order for the math to work, it's going to have to close one way or another. So we agree with that, and we're going to be working on that.
Other questions? Yep, Mr. Bell.
It's a simple question. I don't feel this, but have you guys, I call it thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
Where you go to design engineers and say, hey, give me something else. Give me another design that's going to be more economical.
Yeah.
Something that we don't normally do is pushing through the norm. Something different, something creative that might be a cost center. Have you guys tried to, again, think outside the box on the design?
Yes, we have. The design we've got now. It's the 2 lanes in each direction, 2 managed lanes in each direction, maintaining 3 general purpose lanes in each direction. Primarily, it's at grade, meaning we're talking about building those lanes adjacent to where the existing lanes are, widening the footprint. That still comes with a lot of additional ramps, interchange and interstate interchange connections. So a lot of vertical work, but there's an alternative that we've been asking our consultant to work on kind of offline of this to where we would maybe elevate a portion of those. So, but we don't have that right now. We don't have it completed. We hope to get to it very soon, but I think that's going to be part of optimization, reducing impacts, potentially having to go up in cases to avoid impacts.
That's my question.
Yeah. Sure.
Where you go across and minimize the amount of, I call it damage, costs.
Right. And that'll be balanced between the cost of construction and maintenance of that type of structure versus, those initial upfront costs. But definitely.
Mr. Jones?
Yes, I've got a question about the course analysis and I think Ed mentioned it and somebody else, are these 2 analyses even feasible? I mean, I look at 40 east through Raleigh and 85. Are there any other P3 type analysis in the state of North Carolina going on that are of the same scope or similar characteristics that we're talking about?
I think 77 South is pretty unique, but David Roy might want to add too. I mean, there's other projects in the state.
The analysis here is so regionally, but it really is a state issue that needs more input. This doesn't seem feasible. I mean, we're talking, the numbers are so far off in the years of when it's going to get implemented. The problem is just going to grow substantially, and then we're doing a course analysis even stupider.
May I ask everyone who speaks, will you be sure and turn your microphone on? So, because, we are.
Probably somebody muted me.
Yeah, I think this is a bit overwhelming. And what really, to Ed's point, is what's the reality of the state even ponying up $5 billion for this project?
But I think the other thing is, why would they not expand the cap for the region? So, I mean, if it's just 600,
no cap,
and the cap might need to be
Are they
expanded.
not even going to do $5 billion? I mean, is that the most expensive project that's ever been done in the state of North Carolina?
I mean, to my knowledge, I think this is the most expensive project that we've contemplated in the state.
Yeah. So I think that it doesn't matter how many tolls they get or how, the state's not going to pony up $5 million or $5 billion.
That was kind of my point too. A little of this
Are we?
is
Are we?
academic.
Sure. I mean, a lot of it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
in order for that to work, you're talking about a lot of financing.
Again,
Right.
it doesn't matter if it's borrowed or if it's
I just think
in the
it's
bank.
I think it's
Are they
so
gonna do this project?
disproportionate regionally to have two tolls coming in and out of Charlotte when you don't have that going through Raleigh.
Mm-hmm. How many are in Raleigh?
Wonder why that is.
Well, I mean, but I think it needs to be
Coming
more of a
north.
state
Uh-huh.
conversation versus us doing this analysis. It just seems irrelevant.
Right. So to bring that full circle, how many people have been to Raleigh to complain about the funding of the roads?
I've been to complain about it.
Well, we should have our state representative in one of these conversations so
So
she can understand and hear what we're talking about.
And it's a large conversation, and we've talked about it on Beyond 77, advancing the plan, that everybody here needs to be in lockstep going to Raleigh. It's not just one senator or one representative, and everybody's ear. So to your comments and questions, we can sit here and go, oh my gosh, what are we going to do about it? But what are we going to do about it?
Just a quick comment. I was in Raleigh today at the Metro Mayors Conference with about 25 mayors, and the lack of sufficient funding for DOT was discussed at length in today's meetings that we had. So it's
the only thing
been discussed continually. I mean,
right.
Can't do your job if you don't have enough funds to do it. I mean,
Exactly. Take one more comment and we'll keep moving.
I think you made a great point. We ought to invite our General Assembly delegations for the entities represented here. I don't recall that happening since I've been on CRTPO. I would love to see that happen as soon as they're in recess. And, thank you to the reporter who texted me to say that it's apparently public information that I-77 North is, their revenues are $100 million a year, approximately, that they reported last year, $90 million in revenue. Is that checking out with what you understand?
I wouldn't want to try to quote that right now, but certainly, we could share any information that is public like that.
Yeah, it would be really good
I don't have it committed to memory.
It'd be really good to have a graph with what the debt was, like what they had to take on to build it, and how many years and how much revenue, so that we could rough out for ourselves and not just rely upon their representations. Sure. If that could be done, I would be very grateful.
And Rusty paid 20% of that.
There you go. Good.
Shareholder.
All right. So Brett, you have a list of questions that maybe bring back to
Sure.
for everybody and continue analysis and I don't want to say value engineering, some innovation, right? Innovation. Super. Well, I don't know if we're going to applaud you or not, but maybe.
I don't need
the
it.
fact
I'm
that
good.
you
Thank
came.
Oh, come on, guys. Come on. All right. Go, Brett.
All right, Brett. Keep coming back. Okay, we're gonna move on, and thanks to everybody. Hopefully, everybody get their questions answered. There's more to peruse. We'll have more opportunity to ask additional questions on all of these topics. Let's move on to upcoming agenda items. Mr. Cook.
All right, thank you very much. At our July meeting, we will have a request before you to open a 14-day public comment period on the draft regional impact local input point assignments that Travis mentioned earlier in the meeting. And we'll also have some potential action on the memorandum of understanding that the chair will be addressing in just a moment or two. As to information reports, we'll have an update on our 2055 MTP public involvement activities, MTP being the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. We are updating the CRTPO's required Title VI. That's Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and limited English proficiency plan. So we'll have a presentation on work associated with that. We'll be giving you an update on Beyond 77 activities. And then last but not least, Brett will be back to talk about the I-77 corridor. And then I'd like to make one other announcement. This is very good news. We got excellent news today, and Brian will give you a few more details in a moment. But we received word today from USDOT that we received a $5 million raise grant That's rebuilding America's infrastructure with sustainability and equity. This is something that this board heard reports on several months ago when we submitted the application, and we finally got the news today that we were an award winner. And to give you a little bit of context, we received $5 million. There was $1.8 billion available throughout the country, $13 billion worth of requests. So competition was very, very tough for this, and we came out on top with a $5 million award. And I want to thank Brian and Will and Jennifer. They put together the application. We did it all in-house, and I think that speaks volumes for the quality of staff that we have here. And I'm very, very of the work that they did. And Brian's going to take a minute or two just to give you an overview of what's involved with this grant award.
Yeah. So as Bob said, $5 million, really big. And again, 0% local match required. The study is called Making Our Roads Safer, a cross-jurisdictional study. We're going to be focusing on safety improvements, accessible design, flexible trips, equitable planning, and reconnecting communities. That's what SAFER stands for. There was a sort of handout out at the front table. If you didn't get it on your way in, make sure to grab one on the way out. You can also visit crtpo.org/raise, and we'll be providing you guys a lot more information there. But yeah, we're very excited. I got a text at 7 a.m. to let me know that something had happened, and we're excited to share more with you as this plan is developed.
Great.
So some good news tonight.
There's some good news. So yep, there is a little bit of money. So congratulations again to Bob and the entire staff, because we worked very, very hard, and a lot of iterations and a lot of pencil sharpening, and y'all did an amazing job. So we appreciate that very much. Look forward to how that's going to get implemented throughout our entire region. So good job.
Thank you.
Couple of things. We'll move on to some board member comments. So at our last meeting, we had a presentation from Mujib in regards to the MOU, and he brought forward to us the modeling based on population and a couple of the just technical language on the MOU. And after that meeting, actually, Mayor Murray came up to me and said, "Hey, based on that presentation, it sounds like that we should get another vote because our population went up." And I said, "Well, it's a great point. Let's, run that up to staff." So what everybody's passing out right now is kind of an update based on the fact that through that census and the increased population numbers, that does warrant some additional changes in this. So we had, let me just say something. If you've not implemented the unbelievable knowledge and talent of the staff, the CRTPO staff, you're missing out, because very quickly they put together some modeling of, based on population, what some of that voting could look like. So the first thing that you're seeing is based on the weighted votes, kind of a look through this to balance out that voting and actually change a little bit of the Charlotte's weighted vote. And I don't want to say dilute that a little bit, but would actually require that they have a few more people come along for that majority, which that was a number of concerns and things brought forward. So we heard that. And so bringing back the proposal that you see here with some revised voting. And then as far as, again, the other questions that came up were, when on votes in the past was the weighted voting applicable to where it took the Charlotte and very few votes for something to pass. So that's what you have on the big spreadsheet, when those votes were, as you can see, the weighted vote factor, and then the population that went along with that. So it was kind of interesting to see that. And this just went back to when the current MOU is in place, right? Which is when Iredell joined the MPO. So that's some, like I said, great information. Was very interesting to see that it wasn't that often in the number of votes that we've taken over this time. Bless you. So after that May meeting, again, we request that anybody that had questions, comments, concerns, anything pertaining to the MOU to reach out to Mujib, and that offer is still out there. What we would really like to do is bring this forward on the July 17th meeting for the board to consider the actions to endorse the revisions to the annual membership jurisdiction cost share methodology. Again, evening that out to be based on population. Then to also endorse the text revisions to the draft MOU document as recommended by Mujib, endorse the revisions to the weighted voting provision within the draft MOU. Again, those are the numbers we just sent to you, and endorse the MOU revisions approved by the CRTPO board and release it for the approval of the membership jurisdictions. So what all that means is if we one by one approve those items, and then the overall MOU, we approve it, it then goes to your individual jurisdictions to also ratify. So that's a lot, but I want to kind of ask if Ed wanted to offer any comments in regards to the information.
Well, we did have a conversation about changing the voting structure, right? So, and I think the suggestion was that the 6 largest members would have 3 votes instead of 2, increasing the total number of votes to 74 from 68, with Charlotte remaining at 31. And therefore, the number of votes needed in addition to Charlotte in order to carry a decision would be higher. But I do think if you look at this last schedule on the handout you just got, there were 392 action requests, and a review revealed that 5 of them had a significant mix of positions taken by the members. And if you look at the population numbers, you see that in each case, in terms of people, of population, there was still a significant number on the side of the action that carried. And also, if you look at the first 3, the last 2 were actually pretty much the same thing. So you look at the first 3, there were 44 votes, 50 votes, 49 votes. It wasn't close. It wasn't like Charlotte had 31 of those, and therefore there were significant votes in that structure that did align with Charlotte. And the closest ones then were basically one issue in 2017 related to the resolution supporting the designation of the Catawba crossings. So I talked to the mayor and the manager, and Charlotte is agreeable with the idea of giving a little extra weight to the largest members and thereby somewhat reducing our percentage in the whole thing, recognizing that Charlotte by population does have a majority, and we recognize that you can't do a population count and have us run the whole thing. Nobody else would come to the meetings. So I'm just hoping that adjustment in response to questions about the structure, which raises from 4 to 7 the number of votes that need to be with Charlotte in order for Charlotte's position to carry the day, that is helpful. But the point I made before was I think the occasions on which this issue is actually a problem are rare, because by far the majority of the actions taken by this body have not seen important disagreement among the members. So I think that's the comment I would make, and I just hope that people feel that this change is responsive to some of the questions that have been raised. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Are those new numbers reflected in the MOU?
Well,
those changes have not yet been made. Is that what?
Correct.
Correct.
No, the new MOU would be voted on, but
right. But I'm saying, so that's not written down anywhere.
It's not done.
That was your suggestion, was
just offering that.
Okay. Thank you.
Adjustment.
Got you. Thanks.
Other questions on the information? Again, you still have another 30 days to discuss this with your fellow board members. Any questions that you want to pose to Mujib, the offer is still out there to have any one-on-one conversations or small group virtually, anything like that. We want to make sure everybody feels comfortable in what the request will be for the MOU revision. In order to make any MOU revisions, this is really, really important. So if you've not paid attention to anything else tonight, other than it's $5 billion to do that project, the revisions require a 75% super majority vote of this board. So if we don't have enough people to even get to a voting structure in July, because July is usually kind of light. So, please try to put this on your calendar, that we would then push it into August. But I'd really like to get this done. I mean, those of you that have been on the board for a while, that I feel like we've talked about this for a long time, and it would be good to kind of get some direction and keep moving on to where we can figure out how we're going to get projects funded. So if you're not going to be able to be at the meeting on July 17th, if you'll let Neil know, or Bob, that would be really helpful. So we'll know kind of how to plan for the agenda on that day. So again, July 17th, it'll be a big party. I don't know what we'll celebrate, but we'll celebrate something. The $5 million, right? We'll have cake maybe. So that's kind of all of that in a nutshell.
Bourbon, and everybody will be here.
Oh, bourbon. Oh, okay. Well, there you go. There you go. Yeah, everybody's getting bourbon on that. All right. Any other questions, comments from the board? I know this has been a long meeting, but a lot of great information. I know I've certainly learned a lot of additional details. And if not, let me get a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right. All those in favor?
Stand up and leave.
All right. Great. Thanks. Everybody be safe.
I think we were.